Welcome to the Town of Fairfax Planning Commission public hearing. This is Thursday, January the 21st, and we're meeting via teleconference. And of course, all of the Town of Fairfax public meetings are being conducted right now via teleconferencing or other electronic means consistent with the State of California Executive Directive regarding public health and public transparency. The public will be able to view this meeting on television or online and can also participate in this meeting via teleconference or email. Members of the public can join or watch this meeting on live TV, either TV 27, or it's going to be available on Zoom or by telephone call. If you look at the cover of our agenda, the webinar information and the exact URLs are available. You can provide public comment during this meeting in one of the following ways, either using the public comment form directly on our live stream meeting on the town's website, or we are streaming on Zoom. And so you can raise your hand function during the public comment time and you'll be unmuted when it's your turn to talk. If you're calling in, please press *9 during the public comment time to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself to speak. We always encourage the public to submit their comments in writing to the staff for the Planning Commission ahead of time because we want to get a little prepared and understand what you've said there. If the comments are received after the circulation of our Planning Commission packet, but prior to the start of the meeting, they'll be sent to the Planning Commission, will be part of the meeting record. If the comments are received after the start of the meeting, they will be part of the meeting record. Public comments will not be read out loud by staff at the meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and staff, if we could have the roll call.
Okay, Fragoso.
Present.
Gonzalez-Parber. Absent. Green.
Here.
Newton. Absent. Swift.
Here.
Chair Rodriguez.
Here. Thank you. I'd like to entertain an approval of the agenda and maybe just pointing out one anomaly. The geo-referenced version is now being moved to item number 1. Ben wants to get this off the calendar and try to get it fully heard this evening. We don't normally do that, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Is there anybody interested in approving the agenda?
Well, if I may, I had wondered about the positioning of that. If there's folks waiting for 48 to 52 Bolinas Road who might be inconvenienced by the map being number 1, that's my only concern.
There are 4 people in attendance. I can see at least one of them is the representing the property owner. I don't know about the second person.
Through the chair, one thought was that in looking at what staff's proposing with respect to the Ridgeline Scenic Corridor at this meeting, it was hoped that the recommendation of the commission and the topics being discussed are a little bit more straightforward than in prior meetings. It wouldn't take as much time, but it's up to your commission, of course.
Through the chair.
Fragoso?
Yes, thank you. I would say let's go through the geo-referenced item as number 1 agenda. I don't think it will be as time consuming as these reports have been in the past. And it's nice to do it when everybody's clear-headed.
Let's make note for the record that Commissioner Newton has now joined the meeting.
That looks like
Is there any more discussion?
on here. Was that?
Yes. No.
Is there any more than discussion on the agenda? We have one person concerned about it and one person wanting to do it. Would need to make a motion in one direction or another, but I'd like to hear from Cindy.
I can go either way. This is fine the way it is for me.
And Mimi, have you heard what we're talking about is that approval of the agenda. Item number 1 is the geo-referenced item, and normally we would move that after item 2 because that's the public hearing item. Do you have a concern either way? We lost.
Was that back to me, Michelle?
No, we lost Mimi. Mimi was on and then she just left. So we have,
Okay.
Either of you can go ahead and make a motion either way, and you'll have to see what kind of a vote we have.
Okay, well, let me say real quick then, because Commissioners Fregoso and Swift think that this can move along pretty quickly, I don't have a concern any longer, because,
Okay.
so.
All right, then I will move that we accept the agenda as it is.
Thank you.
Second,
We have a first by Fregoso and a second by Green. If you could call the vote.
Fregoso,
Aye.
Green,
aye,
Swift,
Aye.
Chair Rodriguez.
Aye. Thank you very much. So we'll go ahead and move on to meeting protocol. The chair shall maintain order at the meetings in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order, and the commission has the responsibility to be a model of respectful behavior in order to encourage community participation and citizen input at commission meetings. The commission and the audience are expected to refrain from using profane language and or ridiculing the character or motive of commission members, staff, or members of the public, and to maintain standards of tolerance and civility. This is the time for public comments on non-agenda items. Anyone wishing to address the commission on matters not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission, must do so by email or in person via Zoom in the manner described earlier. Is there anyone who has their hand raised or would like to raise their hand now in the attendees group that wants to speak on an item not on the agenda? The two people that I see are actually the applicant and the property owner. The third is Mirenda TV, so I'm going to assume that no one's going to raise their hand unless, is there anybody, there's the fourth person who just came and I see no hand. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our consent calendar. Let me just bring up the conduct. That all persons are invited to participate in public hearings in order to give all interested parties an opportunity to be heard and to ensure the presentation of all points of view. Members of the audience should 1, limit presentations to 3 minutes, 2, provide their comments by email as described earlier, 3, state your view and concerns succinctly. Any alternatives would be helpful as well. And 4, submit any new documents to the planning staff first via email to be entered into the record. On then to consent calendar items. We have no consent calendar, so we'll go ahead right into the public hearing item, which is the geo-referenced version of the 1974 map. And this is our 9th meeting on the town's Ridgeline Scenic Corridor. And staff is taking another tack. We see that they want us to focus on Part A, which is the areas north of Sir Francis Drake. And it's essentially bringing in the 1974 visual reference map. And they want to return to the commission at a future date to explore further clarifications on zoning text. And this one does not include any zoning text, it's map only. And the recommendation, Ben, when you give your overview would be really helpful. It sounds like you're asking us just to accept this Part A map, which is a Part A, attachment A and B, but there's really no formalized document in here that would do that act. So that was a little concerning for me, but anyway, I'll pass it on to you, Mr. Berto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we, as your commission knows, discussed this at the December meeting, and staff at that time was proposing a town-wide approach involving diagrammatic support for the various ways in which our current Ridgeline Scenic Corridor is defined in our zoning ordinance, and your commission had raised a number of concerns at the December meeting with both the mapping, both the visual portion and some of the text changes. And so staff decided to step back and frankly look at what the recommendations of the chair were, which was to take a look at what we already had and see to what extent that could be applied. And it became clear that really the concerns that staff had and that the commission in turn was responding to were focused on those ridge lines that were south of Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. And therefore, in consultation with other staffers, staff is now coming back to your commission with a different alternative, which was, and let me go to share screen now. Which is to focus our efforts in terms of the 150-foot horizontal ridgeline scenic corridor and the 100-foot vertical ridgeline scenic corridor on those defined ridgelines north of Sir Francis Drake. And what we have here, also in response to commission comments and concerns at the last meeting, is the entirety of the 1974 visual resources map. Now, this has been geo-referenced, so it can now be applied to actual physical features, property boundaries, and the like. But it is the entirety of the area. It includes visual resource areas, which are shown in this type of diagrammatic method. And also includes, for clarity's sake, the boundaries of the town. And you can see this represents Sir Francis Drake Boulevard running through Fairfax. And so what we're discussing in terms of making the focus of our mapping efforts, the area to the northeast of Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. In other words, these ridges here, and waiting to do further mapping on these ridge lines south of Sir Francis Drake for a future meeting. There are many benefits to doing that. The first is that when we're applying the language that exists in our code as it's currently written, we can do so with these corridors north of Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. And what you can see now are the various, just as a reference point, even though we don't have the streets drawn, this represents the Oak Manor, the sort of the Y, where you have the little slice of the county, and the ridge line to the northwest of that, and the ridge lines. This is the area on Mirenda Drive, and this is the ridge line surrounding Willow. So what you can see is, as currently defined in our code, we can apply, and I can zoom in a little bit here. We can now apply these various ridge lines. For example, the Ridgeline Scenic Corridors 1974, what you see is shown in dark green. And it's also reflected on this map in the green portion that's in town. So we split it out where when you hit town boundaries, you can tell, okay, this different colored green is the 1974 Ridgeline Scenic Corridor. And then the dark green is where you get into the county. And you also have the 150-foot horizontal distance from the ridge line. And that's represented by blue. And you can see this is the ridge line that's been now geo-referenced. And so the blue just follows along 150 feet away from that ridge line. And then finally, you have the 100-foot vertical distance RSC. Second. And that is represented in the purple or mauve. And you can see in some instances, for example, here where you have finger ridges or slightly higher features where it takes longer to run out that 100-foot vertical drop from the ridge line, it's a little bit wider. And so at the various locations, it can go beyond where we currently show with our green Ridgeline Scenic Corridor from the 1974 map. That's where you're seeing the majority of the difference between as we define it currently in the code with just the 1974 diagram and the 150 foot and 100 foot are Ridgeline Scenic Corridors. So staff believes, let me zoom this out again, that this is a good starting point, that we can now take what is currently in our code and apply it diagrammatically to these portions of town that are northeast of Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. What you're seeing right here are the contour lines from the 1974 map. So we've overlaid the 150 foot horizontal and 100 foot vertical Ridgeline Scenic Corridors to that 1974 map. So this is incorporated into the baselines. And we will have a version of this map with your commission's concurrence available at Town Hall as the official document. We will also provide this as a layer in the Marin map GIS program, so that if any applicant, any interested party, whomever wishes to determine where the boundaries of the Ridgeline Scenic Corridor lie with reference to real physical features, whether those are roadways, property boundaries, contour lines. I mean, I'm sure most of your commission has been on Marin map. It's marvelous. You can use it and apply it against aerial photographs if you like. So this will allow everybody to apply these Ridgeline Scenic Corridors for the first time to specific locations and properties. We will also, as part of this, be updating our Ridgeline Scenic Corridor property list so that staff is aware. I would anticipate we would be using a combination of going to Marin map and highlighting a particular parcel and seeing with an overlay of this RSC, whether it's in or out or partly in or partly out. But we would also be looking at that list of properties that have at least a portion in the RSC. So without changing the definitions, we have now for the first time actually diagrammed where those Ridgeline Scenic Corridors as defined in chapter 17060 of the zoning ordinance exist. We'll now be able to apply those to properties and make the appropriate determinations about whether or not to apply the RSC boundaries. We do not believe that insofar this is simply a clarification of our existing regulations, that this requires any formal action by the commission. I believe a consensus by your commission accepting this map would be sufficient at this time. At a future date, we will return to your commission for more discussion of what to do with the areas, scroll up here, with these portions and ridge lines that are south of Sir Francis Drake, and I'll just bring my cursor over these, including Fairfax Ridge and the various other ridges, all these south of town. For now, it should be noted that this geo-referenced map that incorporates obviously the entirety of the town as well as surrounding areas will be adequate to determine which properties lie within the 1974 Ridgeline Scenic Corridor. So that will be part of our list, and that will be, you will be able to determine anywhere in town, whether you are within that Ridgeline Scenic Corridor. It's simply that south of Sir Francis Drake, we would call that the Part B portion of our work. We would simply be referencing the 1974 boundaries, the green boundaries that you see on this map. So my recommendation and request of the commission is that you accept the clarified Part A cumulative Ridgeline Scenic Corridor maps as providing the diagrammatic backdrop for Chapter 17.060, and I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Recognizing Commissioner Swift.
Yep. Okay, so I had two questions before we get into discussion. One of them had to do with attachment A and B, and their description and titles at the top state that they're distances from the ridges, not the ridge line. Thanks. So can you explain why that doesn't say the ridge line versus the ridges? And then my second question with that is attachment B doesn't include in its legend the visually significant areas. So can you explain why that was left off that?
Sure. So going back to your first question, we could change that language if you would like. We simply use that as a reference to say it's the ridges, but it could be the ridge lines.
Well, but the 150-foot horizontal distance per the code is from the ridge line.
Right.
Which can make a difference when you look at whether a structure fits in to this area.
We likely in developing this looked at the number of words we had there and the length of the words and said, where can we shorten this so it fits in? So if your commission directs, we will certainly change ridges to ridge lines.
I have to say, I agree with Commissioner Swift on that. As it is now, it seems it's somewhat ambiguous or could be ambiguous. So we certainly want to conform that to the language of the ordinance.
So let's wait and let Commissioner Swift complete her questions. Are you done with your questions?
Well,
Yeah, I'm done with that one. And then
Okay,
if
go on.
Planning Director Berto could address the legend on attachment B.
Yes. The attachment B is sort of a zoomed in version, and it's provided for clarity's sake, so that you could actually see the three different Ridgeline Scenic Corridor as they're defined and combined to show the cumulative boundary of the RSC. This is really the map, as noted in the title, that this is the 1974 map of visual resources. So this is the base map that we would be applying. This is what we would have copied and available, the official version at Town Hall. And if you look over in this corner, let me zoom in.
It's on attachment A. I was concerned about the use of attachment B.
Sounds
And
like
in
they're not going to be
relation
using
to
it.
visually
We would only be
significant
approving
areas.
attachment A.
Yeah,
For
if you,
purposes of today's meeting, he's bringing attachment B as a
correct,
blow up.
that's correct. So
Any other-
it's a good point because right there, there's a visually significant area that isn't defined, but it's simply a zoomed in version for clarification's sake.
So attachment A is the only map that you would be publicly utilizing?
Correct.
Okay. Those are my two questions.
Thank you. Any other commissioners with questions?
I'm sorry, I interrupted that, not realizing that it wasn't, that Commissioner Swift wasn't finished. But I think in consistency, Fairfax ridges should be Fairfax ridge lines, ridge should be ridge line, ridges should be ridge line in that draft of Part A large map, which is attachment A up in that. So I agree with that. Otherwise, yeah, I have no other questions, no other comments.
Commissioner Fregoso.
Thank you. Into the principal, we are still, okay. Just for clarification, a question for staff. With this map and with the, what's the word for the zoomed out area that is shown on attachment B, I see we are including the full horizontal and vertical distances as specified in the original Ridgeline ordinance, even though many of them, several of them in fact, go out into the penny plain, which may or may not make sense, but that's a different discussion, correct?
Actually, Commissioner Fregoso, if you look at what's north, we avoid that extension into the flatland area. That's one of the reasons why in visiting what we were going for, it's these stop high enough, the official Ridgeline stops high enough on the ridge that we can apply it without that concern.
Okay, that's good. It just wasn't exactly clear to me, but I agree with that approach. And secondly, I very much agree with and like the approach of splitting the baby at this point, because the attachment A that we hopefully will concur on this evening gives staff an effective, workable solution to identify exact locations of an applicant's property. I think it enhances staff work in that way without making any changes to the maps. So I am all in favor of that. And in fact, it appears to me that any further work or beyond Part A on the Ridgeline maps, I think might be most appropriate when the town undergoes the general plan amendment, of which the Ridgeline Scenic corridors are part of the open space plan, I believe, or maybe the conservation plan. So that might be a more appropriate time to look further into any of those remaining issues. But I agree with this approach for now. Thank you.
Thank you. The questions that I have is in the December 17th packet, we had a variety of maps or attachments in the back. And there were a lot of questions about where were we pulling lines in, constricting them or retracting and moving out. And that kind of was a concern. And so now looking at attachment A or B is the only change from the authentic 150 and 100-foot distance only at Sir Francis Drake, where you can see it's been squared off. Or have you manipulated the lines in any way from where that's truly located?
I believe, even though some of these look squared off, I believe these all terminate at the base of the hill, or it terminates above the peneplain.
Well, then, I don't know if I heard you, but there is an authentic line at which the 150-foot horizontal and 100-foot vertical line falls. It's either blue or pink. Has those authentic lines been modified in any way on this map?
I would have to check with our GIS consultant, but I believe that all of these ridge lines as shown are the authentic terminus of those locations.
And so on the December 17th packet, these four ridges are called what? Like here there was Elliott Preserve, there was Fairfax Ridge, there was Glen Drive, what are these?
Yeah, you know what? I don't have that packet in front of me. Unfortunately, I'm
Or do you
I'm
know
not
by
in
just
the
looking
office
at,
at this time.
do you know by
But
just looking at these
yeah.
maps, these ridges, what their names are?
Yeah, I do not know. We came up with terminology that seemed to be appropriate for the name of those ridges, but I would have to reference back to that packet. I
Okay.
do know that when we were looking at the challenges with mapping, and let me go back up here, where we were really focusing in on, questions about, okay, do we change our definitions so that we address them running into the peneplain? Fairfax Ridge right here where I've got my cursor, that was the main focus, because if your commission will recall, the 100-foot vertical not only had to be clipped at the bottom of the hill, but that it ran laterally for 1,500 feet. So whereas this 1974 RSC is more or less 150 feet wide on either side of the ridge, you expanded that width per the current definition by 15 times if you tried to apply the 100-foot vertical. Similarly, in the Elliott Preserve area, on this area right here, as you can see, it touches the creek on both sides. So you're basically in the floodplain of that. And that's why we said, you know what, in this references to Commissioner Fragoso's comment, that we really need to do this as part of a larger scale undertaking. I mean, I've heard comments
Yeah,
from.
no, I understand the history, but I think what I'm trying to, okay, so yeah. All right, well, that is my only concern in looking at this, is that I mean, the good side of this is that this adds more protection than the 1974 map, because we now are reflecting the blue and pink areas. That's the good news. My discomfort level is that I don't know whether this map has been manipulated from the authentic lines, and that's why we had to continue it to this meeting. And that's how we came up with the solution to just deal with this maps. And I love this approach. I think this is the right approach. So that part I like. Okay, so maybe we'll take some public feedback and then we'll try to maybe move on. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak on these maps? If so, please raise your hand. I'm recognizing former Mayor Fred Ager.
Yes.
Hi, Frank.
Frank Ager, 13 Meadow Way. So in trying to understand these maps, the 74 map that Wallace, Bacard, Roberts, and Todd prepared, that is one of these maps up here, right? Is that the top map or the bottom map?
Attachment C.
The bottom map.
Attachment A,
yeah.
top map.
Okay.
It's what you see on the screen right now.
Yeah. So in looking at the map and the coloring, the questions I have, the first question would be, will any structures be allowed in the green area on that map? Or is there a prohibition on structures in that green area?
We would have to go into chapter 17.060. I know that your commission in December looked at a project that was in the RSC and did approve it. So without trying to dive into the specifics, there are circumstances wherein structures are allowed. Specific findings have to be made, or specific determinations have to be made. But for example, there are properties that are completely within the RSC, the Ridgeline Scenic Corridor, as defined in the 1974 map. And so the alternative would be a takings, where you simply say you can't build anything.
Well, in looking at the 100 or so acres up there above Mirenda Oaks, it depends on where those lines are drawn for the parcels. When we looked at that map, and when the doctor came in and we were rezoning, we talked about that map and the prohibitions, and pointed out that any development would have to be outside of those ridgeline scenic corridors. That there could be no development in a ridgeline scenic corridor, so they'd have to come off the corridor and down in either swale or a location that was out of that corridor. Now, Dr. Wall agreed with that, and that night at that meeting, we said at the most, not many units could be built there, maybe 4 units on 100 acres, maybe 4, maybe 5 at the most, because we weren't going to allow development in the ridgeline scenic corridor. So that's the first question. Second question is, will structures be allowed in the blue area that we see on this map? Is there a prohibition against structures in the blue area, or is that kind of up in the air?
The same regulations would apply when you go to the definition portion of a ridgeline scenic corridor. And this is really what this effort was doing, was diagramming the way the ridgeline scenic corridor is currently defined in the zoning ordinance. So the blue area and the pink area are part of that defined ridgeline scenic corridor area. The same regulations that apply to the green area apply to the blue and purple areas.
Any other questions? It does not sound like it. Okay, so we're back then to a commissioner decision on whether this attachment A is appropriate. And I think I'm hearing a majority of people say yes. I think I only brought up the concern about its location being distinct, and we for sure want to make sure that if anybody's getting blow-ups, that they're getting that visual resource information, but we're really only referring to attachment A. I think we should encourage staff to come back with different areas of the town as you can, and I think dealing with distinct areas is good. I'll stop there because I'm not sure how I'm going to vote on it, not knowing about whether it's been manipulated or not. So if anybody wants to make a motion, go ahead.
Chair Rodriguez, did we close public comment?
I didn't say that. Oh, but you know what? I see another hand raised. It looks like Frank Yeager's got his hand raised again. So I will do that after he speaks one more time.
Yes, I did have another comment to make. Director Berto mentioned that you had an application in December on the Ridgeline Scenic Corridor, and that was up on Ridgeway, I believe. And one of the differences between Ridgeway is it's a street with a lot of homes already, a lot of structures already there. This was more of an infill lot. When you look at say the so-called Mirenda Heights project, there's no development up there, and to now determine that development will be allowed in the Ridgeline Scenic Corridor is in direct opposite of the intent of the 1974 map. That applicant who's applying up there has enough land to move the structures off of the Ridgeline Scenic Corridor. And to say that it's okay to put structures on the Ridgeline Scenic Corridor just doesn't seem to make sense at all for us. Thank you. That's all.
And I think what I was hearing Director Berto saying is that there's no proposed change to the historic language in the ordinance, that this is a clarifying map, both to make the historic the Wallace Roberts Todd map GIS and available to folks, and then to overlay on that map the 150-foot horizontal and 100-foot vertical that's in the RSC ordinance onto the map, so that they are actually extending any protections in that RSC ordinance. The question for the public, really, and not really being considered by the Planning Commission, is whether the language of protection in the RSC ordinance is really doing what you think it says. And I'm questioning whether it does or not. And I think that project in December proved it does not. So you have a good point, but I think that people should look more closely at the ordinance. Okay, so I'll go ahead and close the public hearing then. And is there anyone willing to make a motion or further discussion? Commissioner Fregoso.
Thank you. Before making a motion, I would just, or it's not really a motion that we need, but before my final comment, I just would like to say that the intent of this map is not to restrict how the ordinance is read. It's not to allow development on the ridgeline, but to more clearly identify the 100 and 150 foot horizontal and vertical, so that one can more clearly say where a property may be bumping into those areas where development is not approved. So I believe this is a wonderful solution. I'm very happy with it. And if I were voting, or my consensus is that we agree with this and move forward. Because we don't require a motion, right?
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe a
with
vote, maybe a vote, maybe a raise hand consensus
Yeah.
poll.
Yeah, well, I want to make sure that people have had their opportunity to speak about it, but then that's how we
Yes.
can conclude it. Go ahead, Commissioner Green.
Okay, yeah, I just want to say, I agree with you, Commissioner Fregoso, that we will revisit this in the future, but I think this is a good practical solution, and with the changes suggested, Fairfax, in the legend and the note that this is the only map we are sending on for future use or approval, I'm good with that. I don't know if I need to make a motion.
No, Commissioner Swift, any comments?
Yeah, I do. The Appendix A excerpt, which discusses the visual resources map 9 of the 1974 conservation element of the general plan, states that the Ridgeline Scenic Corridor is composed of the ridgeline and the uppermost elevation of the valley walls. The definitions in the Ridgeline Development Code speak to the area within 150 feet horizontal distance from the ridgeline, as well as 100-foot vertical distance of that ridgeline, whichever is the greater area. And it also states that both of those are already mapped on the Visual Resources Map 9. So that tells me the map has, the original Visual Resources Map 9 has taken into consideration the 150-foot horizontal from the ridgeline, the 100-foot vertical. So that area, when you look at structures that may impact that area, and that's already been mapped on that map 9. So the map 9's taken into consideration already the 150-foot horizontal, the 100-foot vertical. So when I see the map that we've now mapped out, we've got areas that, and this is my difficulty with this, we've got areas there in pink representing a 100-foot vertical distance from ridges that extends beyond the 150-foot horizontal from the ridge line. So that is not what I see as I read the Ridgeline development code. To me, what I read in there, and when I look at that original map, is that both the 100-foot vertical and the 150-foot horizontal are encompassed in that green area, in essence, along those major ridge lines. So I don't agree with extending out that 100-foot vertical beyond those areas and beyond the area that's on the original map.
Yes, you're clear.
I also don't agree with mapping of this type that only considers things that are within the town limits, because I'm not sure, looking at this, that there aren't scenic ridgeline corridors that are outside the actual city limits, but that would be impacted by building within the city limits, which to me would conflict with the intent of the Ridgeline Development Code. And then my third point on that is that, when we're making changes to only one section of a map, and we're doing it piecemeal by sections, the likelihood that we would not complete, or that we would complete this process on the rest of this map is not great, considering, we're going to be talking about workload and things like that. So I can see, even doing this piece of it, where do I agree with, how it's been mapped out for the 100-foot, we would never get to the rest of the town and the rest of the mapping. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Fiscal.
Thank you. I guess I will be somewhat contradictory to what Commissioner Swift said, because if, as she indicated, the dark green, the original dark green ridge line in the old map, according to Commissioner Swift, that dark green area already includes the vertical and horizontal distances that are to be considered. I believe Commissioner Swift has found discrepancies and inconsistencies within the original ordinance that is causing some confusion, and that if what she states is true, that means that development could occur in all the pink and blue zones. Whereas we're saying, no, the pink and blue incorporates the 100 and 150 foot requirement. So if anything, this is stricter in that regard, and clearly helps identify the proximity of any property. The intent here is not to change a ridge line, which cannot be changed, but only to determine the proximity of an applicant's proposal to the actual ridge line. And I will stop there.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move this item off the agenda. I think Director Berto, what you're hearing is 2-2. You don't have a total acceptance of the maps. You heard 2 people accepting it, 2 people not accepting it. If you choose to bring it back to bring more clarification, on some of the points you've heard this evening. I'll leave that up to you, but we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item. Unless, Director Berto, do you need any other points? That was all clear to me.
I believe that's where we're at, so thank
Okay,
you.
sounds good. Let's go ahead and move on then. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughtful consideration on that item. Going on to public hearing item number 2. This is 48 to 52 Bolinas Road, application number 21-01, request for a design review permit to remove the existing shingled Mansard style roof and replace and repair the front facade of an existing commercial building. Assessor parcel number 115-15, which is a central commercial zone. And I can see that the applicant architect is here as well as the owners. And we got a good staff report. The one thing I wanted to point out on this application is that staff is in fact saying that they are that the color palette is not a favorite for staff, and in fact they'd like our consideration to continue the item, directing the applicant to modify the proposed color palette and continue it to the February 18th meeting. So that they can work on that. So I'll go ahead and turn the presentation over to staff.
Okay. Yeah, the applicants have already removed the dilapidated wood shingled awning with the approval of the Fairfax Building Department because it became dangerously unstable and was dropping shingles. The shingled awning ran the entire length of the building, and the applicants are proposing to replace it with horizontal cement fiber siding that will extend upwards to cover the restored parapet, which screens the existing roof HVAC from view. The front of the building will be painted dark gray, along with the brick siding that makes up the remainder of the building facade. Black awnings over the entrances to suites 52 and 50 Bolinas Road will be erected to match the existing awning above the entrance to 48 Bolinas Road. The parapet will be painted a lighter gray color. The town code requires that any new construction in the central commercial zone district is subject to the design review ordinance regulations and requires the approval of a design review permit. And in order to approve a design review permit, the Planning Commission must be able to find that a project complies with the design review criteria. The proposed material and design change from a shingled Mansard style awning running the length of the building to horizontal siding articulated with 3 awnings and with the retention of the existing brick siding on the lower portion of the facade will create a modern building frontage with sufficient variety to avoid monotony in external appearance, with balance and unity among its external features to present a harmonious appearance and conforming to the general character of other structures in the vicinity. And what staff was, to clarify what the chair was explaining, staff's just not a favor of the gray black color palette that is springing up in numerous buildings throughout the town. There was an article in the Chronicle about how the painted ladies are turning gray and black. So it's a trend that I don't personally like. But many years ago, back in 2002, the town made the decision to remove the Planning Commission, the Design Review Board's authority over color changes to the commercial buildings in the downtown. The code used to say that if you were changing the color, you needed to come to a public hearing. That was eliminated from the code, and so now staff doesn't believe that the color is significant enough with the external change to the design for us to say that that doesn't meet the design review criteria. Color is no longer listed as an aspect that can be considered. So we're recommending that you approve the proposed design review permit unless you feel that the color is something that's making this project not comply with the design review criteria changed in the, that's listed in the code. And we provided some photographs to you because the 2 buildings on Bolinas Road right next to this have already gone to the gray and black color change. And so now you're going to have 3 buildings where the majority of the color is gray. And it's just, I believe, different from what you see further down on Bolinas closer to Broadway. So we also provided some photographs in the staff report that shows how colorful, you know, down by the coffee roastery is and how colorful the buildings are across the street. So we are recommending approval. We added the alternate recommendation that should the planning commission share staff's concern about the color, you could continue it. You could either add a condition in the resolution that staff approve an alternative color scheme, or you could continue it and ask the applicant to come back at the next meeting with some different color options for you. And that would
Thank you.
conclude our report.
Oops, sorry. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions for staff? I do. Linda, okay, so in the staff report, it says that this is a 1924 building. And in your staff report, you included the pictures of the downtown and the distinct village character, the mix of architectural styles, the, you know, the small town kind of feel, the preservation of the look. And this design is extremely modern. And so when I look at the general plan, some of the land use policies for town center, and then the town center general plan policies, this is inconsistent with that. And so are you, so how did we go from the general plan policies, which I guess I thought were inconsistent, to this design review, then to approval? I got lost between how we're even looking at a design that's so modern.
Okay, so I should clarify that the town's records are very spotty. I identified a building known as 52 Bolinas, a little square on the Sanborn map, in 1924. So there was some kind of a structure in 1924 on this property. I have no information as to what it looked like, right? This may or may not have some portions of that existing building. So what we've done for other historic buildings, like the one you dealt with that has the hitching post out front, that building has had no changes made to its facade, and we can find photographs of what it looked like, right? This one has been changed over the years. We know that the entire facade was made completely different when it was the live music place. There's a photograph of it on the front page of your plans, right? So my experience with this is if you believe there's some historic aspect that's really part of the original building and you can verify that, you might want to retain that. I don't believe that there's anything on the facade of this building that's original. And so, you know, you could, if you thought there was something, like, I'll give you a good example. On the other side of Bolinas Road, down closer to the intersection with Broadway, there are a number of buildings that were originally built with those transom windows above the doors, and they're beautiful. Well, when I first started working here, a number of them were covered with awnings, right? That's something where we restored to try to, recapture the historic building that was originally built that way. I can't identify any kind of feature of this that dates back, to 1924. I think it's already been changed, and it's been changed in the back. It's been changed in the front.
Okay.
So
I think there's two things maybe that are coming up. One is whether, what part of it was originally, or if at all, in 1924, and then to what degree our direction can stem from the general plan to what other document that talks about the restoration, or I'm concerned about the modernization versus the retention of the village character and enhancing and complementing and that is all of it. It's the architectural style, it's the treatments on the window, it's the color palette, it's the materials and the textures, which are not this.
So I think if they were like, let's say they had to tear down the whole front wall and framing inside, and they were doing a 50% remodel of the structure, I think then you might be warranted to say, we want you to bring it back and make it look more like the buildings down the street, right? But they're not making changes. They've got their electrical, you know, their interior framing is staying. The only thing that's happened is that that front mansard fell apart, right? So they're putting a new siding on. The horizontal siding is kind of modern looking, and I guess you could ask them to change the direction of it or change the color if you thought it might blend in better with the, you know, more historic buildings. But I don't think the amount of work they're doing would warrant asking them to totally rebuild the front facade to try to make it look more like older Fairfax from the 1920s. That's
Thank
just
you.
and that's what the general plan wants us to retain the old buildings. I don't know that it was wanting us to require demolition of existing buildings to recreate buildings that look like the older buildings. You know what I'm saying? There's a limit to what you can put people through.
Commissioner Green?
Yeah, this really isn't a question. Maybe I'll wait until we get back after, back to the,
These are questions for staff on the application. Anybody else? Okay, we'll go ahead then and give the applicant an opportunity to speak with us. I can see Ms. Hilmy is there or Mr. Lyden is there. Would either of you like to speak? Please raise your hand. And Ms. Hilmy.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, hi. Let me just take.
I'm sorry, she dropped out for just a moment as she's rejoining as a panelist.
Hi. Hello. Hi. Thank you for hearing the design review application. I wanted to just address a few of the points that were raised by staff and also by Commissioner Rodriguez. We have a fairly reliable, or a very reliable source regarding the history of the building, and that the current owner, Norma Lyden, her father built the building in the 1940s. So there may have been a structure there going back to the 1920s, but she has confidently told us that she knows it was built by her father. So she inherited the building. She has known it for her entire life. And it served various functions over the years. One of the photos we included in the drawings was a photo actually taken in the 1970s. Despite the vintage cars in front, it was a music venue, and from the photo, it looks like they have a very flat facade, and then there's some kind of deco style sign over the top, which is not of the 1970s era. It looks like it's a 1920s style. So there was definitely some kind of design thing going on then. Shortly after that, the facade, and it's actually a very flat facade, that's 1970s photo. Shortly after that, in the later 70s, this Mansard shingle roof was added. It was built very poorly and held on kind of with nails. And once we opened it up, the structural engineer basically condemned it. The contractor was not willing to touch it to restore it. So that's where we applied, as Linda described, to remove it as an emergency. Underneath it, the third photo on the right that you see on the drawings shows what's there now. We've actually got it tarped because of the weather, but at the moment, the right-hand side in the photo is concrete, flat concrete facade, original construction of this building, which may or may not look modern to you, but it was what was built originally. On the left, there's plywood and wood framing. I don't know why it was built in two different pieces like that, but it's how this is the kind of original. So really what we think we're doing is restoring the original 1940s flat facade. To give some definition, we're going to match the awning that one of the current tenants, Creative Portraiture, has. They have a black awning over their window. And so we're going to add 2 additional awnings to match that and to stop it looking like a completely flat facade. There will also be a box gutter which shows up in the little section. I can share my screen if you'd like to see my drawing on the screen, but if you don't have your drawings in front of you, that easy to see. But there's a section showing that there'll be a box gutter projecting slightly from the facade.
Can you let her share?
I'm sorry?
I'm asking the administrator if you can share your screen.
Yes, she's able to share. Would you go
Okay.
ahead?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I just click share, do I? Okay. Okay, there we go. I will just zoom in a little bit here. So here's the original line of the flat facade. There is existing downspout that comes from the roof behind through the parapet here. And so we will be doing a new box gutter. There was already a box gutter as part of that mansard. So we're basically replacing that. And then instead of the mansard that was there, we're restoring the 1940s flat facade. The materials were actually a suggestion by Ben Berto, somewhat, in that he requested that we used spark resistant materials. And the owners were very happy to comply with that. So we've suggested hardy plank, which mimics 1x8 boards. We've decided to put it horizontally. It's not inconsistent with buildings of really any era to have horizontal siding. There is original brick from the 1970s remodel, we think, or the late 70s remodel down at the bottom here. And our original proposal was to paint it the dark gray. With staff's comments on the colors, we are suggesting that we're willing to modify the design to leave, and in fact, I'll just look at the photo here. So we leave it the existing bricks, warmer reddish color. And so we would just then, so this would stay with the red. We could keep the red, the wood around the windows, and we would just be painting this upper portion and these posts down the middle, the paint color. We have tried to work with the colors of the neighboring buildings. Roco is gray. The gray we're proposing is lighter because we see this building as being the step between Roco here and the Realtors building here, which is a kind of a yellowy color. I did take some images today showing, I don't know if you can see this, can you see these?
We don't see images, we see your plan.
Okay, let me just see if I can.
If it's a separate file, you might want to stop share that. Oh, there you go.
Okay, so this is a color that it was actually taken late afternoon, and I have to say, I think this has come out more blue than it looks normally. The light does change how you see color, but this was it next to the Realtors. I have an image of it next to Roco. And do you see this one, the one next to Roco?
No, we see the Pinnacle Capital Mortgage.
Oh, okay. Okay, so that's the Realtors one. Let me just see this. Do you see this one?
No.
Okay, let me just try and. How about that? Okay, so we're considerably lighter than Roco. And the idea would be that we keep the brick and we do this light silvery gray. Addressing the staff's comments on how popular gray is at the moment, I would say that that is actually a factor. The owners are looking for tenants in a pandemic. They have one tenant who's been there a long time, the portrait studio, and they're looking for tenants for the two other spaces. As has been commented, there have been many buildings have been painted grey colors recently. It seems to be popular. It is a fashion, but in terms of appealing to potential tenants, having a neutral backdrop that will work with any logo that they have already for their business or want to do, something very neutral that is current and but will also kind of go with other colors, was actually a factor in the decision. That's really it. We feel like we're restoring the original facade. We feel like we're trying to adopt kind of a buffer color between Roco and between the Realtors building that's yellow. and we're also trying to appeal to new tenants. And so we respectfully request that the Planning Commission approve the design review per the staff report. Thank you.
Great. If you could stay on, I want to see if there's any questions for you from any of the commissioners. I'm
Yeah.
recognizing Commissioner Swift.
So I had a question concerning the color changes you were proposing. I wasn't clear. You said keeping the bricks red,
Well, yes.
keeping the bricks their current color,
Yeah.
so natural.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that bluish color, but I wasn't real clear on
That's
where
not
you
a change. That's not a change. That's actually the one that you have on your sheet. And I did brush outs of the actual paint there. The photos, I think, were less representative. What I was trying to, that I just showed you now, because of the light, it was late afternoon. So the color that I'm proposing is the pewter color on your sheet. That's the actual color. And it's a physical brush out of the paint itself. It's not a reproduction. The problem with screens and photos is you lose somewhat of the reality, and it's all based on people's screens and printing and things. So that's why I made the effort to actually brush out on your sheet an actual paint sample.
So the pewter color
that would stay.
is the one that you showed the picture where you put it in the field.
Yeah.
So where do you see that going on this building with the bricks staying the color they are?
Yeah. So that would go everywhere where it's currently shown, which is basically here. I don't know if you can still see my screen. So across the top on the new siding, these kind of pillars here, but the brick would stay natural colored. Secondly, the windows at the moment, it's really hard to see on these photos, but these are a natural wood color. So I would suggest that we leave all the windows a natural wood and we don't paint them. One of the reasons we would originally wanted to paint the brick dark is a maintenance issue. With people coming by and splashes and dirt, we just thought it would show up a bit less. But to be honest, the natural brick would also not show the dirt as well. We didn't want to paint it a light color. But we're trying to refresh the building. We want a fresh start. We want it to look, kind of clean and decent and ready to be part of the town again after the previous tenant was there for 35 years, I believe. So it's a psychological change.
Right. So there are vertical wood trim.
Yeah.
So if you look at the building in the middle, you've got between the one the one window. Whoops.
Yeah.
So what those vertical beams, what would those be?
These would be painted. So we would paint these, and then
pewter.
The pewter. And then in between, we would keep the brick and the wood of the windows that are in between this, and they would be repetitive. So they kind of have a grid to them that they're here, there's 4 bays, I think. And then in between, to make them stand out, we would paint this wood. This wood is in terrible shape. I mean, the owners are on a budget, and we feel that painting it will give it a new lease of life. But the quality of the wood it's not really great. Whereas the brick's actually okay, and the window frames are okay. But this wood needs a coat of paint. It needs something, and also it differentiates between the kind of the inset parts. It just kind of makes the emphasis between them, and I think it will be a more attractive facade if there's some difference between these vertical elements and the the horizontal brick. So this would be pewter. This would be pewter. This would be pewter, and then in between, this would just stay its natural color, and this would stay its natural color. And this would stay its natural color. And that's our proposal to address Linda's comments about the dark gray.
Okay, we're going to go on to other questions. Commissioner Green, I'm sorry, and then Commissioner Fregoso.
Okay, let me just, am I muted? No. Just real quickly, you see my background in my Zoom here?
Yes.
It's kind of like the entry to downtown.
Yes.
And you can see sort of the warm colors that you're greeted with. So I kind of feel the same as Linda, but Neil, but I just was wondering would there be a possibility of using some kind of warm color? Because for me anyway, I think the town looks better as it does sort of behind me there. And you would want that to kind of continue a little bit because of the, historical Fairfax look and feel. I don't have a big deal with your color. I would like it maybe to be a little more blue, but I like the way that you're doing the brick and then kind of setting it off with a different color for those wood beams. That's a great idea. It will look better.
Thank
and
you.
it look like 3 stores instead of one long mall or something. So that was my question, is whether a warm color would be at all a consideration.
Well, we're trying to balance. We did actually, you mentioned blue. We actually did look at doing it a proper blue. And then we worried that, say someone comes along and they're kind of, one of the tenants, their logo is red, or it's just something that's going to be hard, or purple or something. It's going to be, we really want to appeal to a wide range of people. It's not particularly easy at the moment to find tenants. The owners are not professional landlords. They inherited the building from the owner's father. They just want to get it, occupied with and we're trying to do a very neutral palette. In response to the warmth of the color, as I mentioned earlier, we're strategically appealing to which is a fashion. It probably means it's not going to be this color forever. We're talking about what people want now, and we would like to do it now. And I live locally. I'm in Fairfax a lot. I do really like the downtown of Fairfax. A lot of those earth colors were done 15 or so years ago, easily. I know some have been done more recently. And there is definitely, again, as Linda pointed out, there's definitely a move to the grays. And we feel that because the neighbors are gray, not just immediately the next, 2 on one side, but also across the road, there's a little shop called Trouvé that's a really dark gray. We don't feel that it's out of context with that end of the street. We're not putting it in between 2, terracotta colored buildings, for example, where it might look incongruous. We feel that we're actually kind of going with our neighbors. That color will work well.
If we could just tighten up the questions and answers right now, because we haven't gotten to public input and I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, like beyond answering the simple question and when a debate. So I want to be really careful about that. I want to recognize Commissioner Fregoso.
Okay.
Thank you. I will try to be brief. While I appreciate the work, the effort you're doing to clean up the building, I will agree with you and staff. As it is today, the building is bastardized and is beyond any recognizable historic fabric other than the brick at the base of the building. And so, no, there's nothing there to preserve in terms of structural elements. However, I do not care for the stark gray and black design, which is too modern, I believe, for the historic character of downtown Fairfax. And historic character doesn't mean, frankly, I love seeing this picture from the 70s with the Radio City. I think that would be way cool. I'd love to see something like that come back across the whole building. But I understand you have 3 businesses there. And I'm wondering, would you consider, I don't like the idea of leaving the brick wall to make us happy and then going ahead with the stark black and gray, which to me just kind of mixes too much. It's not a clean design. Frankly, I would rather see, and I'm wondering if you would consider, rather than using the grays and blacks, that you keep the brick and do some warmer tones, but rather than put in awnings on the facade, do some blade signs, do some really cool blade signs that could have both a modern feel and yet somewhat a historic character of a blade sign that also gives additional visibility way down the street. People can see that blade sign popping out. You could team that up with a couple of copper gooseneck lamps, and you all of a sudden you bring back some architectural character, some historic flavor to it, while doing so in a straightforward and somewhat contemporary manner. And I'm wondering if that is anything you ever considered, but please don't go blue.
No, we didn't want to go blue. The reason we're doing the awnings is twofold. One is because the owner of the portrait studio already has an awning that we took
There's
down.
one there. Maybe she would like a blade sign.
Well, that's true. However, it also provides shade. And in the afternoon, in the summer, these spaces do get hot. And so having some kind of shade actually has a practical benefit. So
there's also glass treatments that can provide that same benefit.
Oh, I see, on the windows. Well, it depends what people want to have in their, their display inside. But having some form of awning, we think, is not inappropriate in a town. There's many shops in San Anselmo.
No, I'm not saying an awning is inappropriate, but I think a blade sign just has more character. But I'll leave it at that.
Okay,
Since
we'll
you're
go
not
ahead
willing to
and stop
consider it.
then and ask if there's any members of the public that would like to speak on this item to please raise your hand. Recognizing former Mayor Frank Egger.
Yes, thank you. Commissioners, just quickly, when I started working in Fairfax in 1959, that building was Harry's Market. And that was Norma's parents that owned that market, the community market, and ran it. They were the Fongs. And when it became River City, it was actually a little later. It was probably mid-70s. And then from River City, they did some remodeling on it. And they also built Harry's Arcade, which is on the other side of the real estate building. And I think maybe the same architect that did Harry's Arcade for the Fongs also helped with some work on the front, redesign or rebuilding the front. Planner Linda Neal said that in 2002, an ordinance, Fairfax adopted an ordinance that dropped the color approval requirements. And I'm wondering what ordinance that was, what number that was, because I don't remember that. And I'm wondering, did the ordinance purposely eliminate any color coordination by the town? Or was that just an error, a mistake that was, oops, so we forgot to put it in the new ordinance? Linda, do you remember it all?
Yeah, I can answer that. I believe it was an error. So the ordinance that what they did is they replaced, I believe they meant to add ordinance 688. There's language. They were trying to add review of 50% remodels to residential structures, making them require design review, right?
Sure.
What they did is they put that in, and the second part of the section that talked about exterior color changes in the commercial zone was eliminated. I don't believe that was the intent, but that's what happened.
Okay.
So it was ordinance 688 was the one that removed, when that got removed, and that was February 5th, 2002 that happened.
Okay,
Funny story, I was still enforcing it for a little while after they adopted that because I didn't realize they had taken it out. And then I was challenged. Where do you see that? And it was no longer there.
Yeah, I just like to say, I would like to agree with Commissioners Fregoso and Rodriguez that if every building in downtown Fairfax becomes dark gray and black, it's really going to change the whole feel of downtown. And since you have this application before us, I believe whether or not the town code says you can change colors or modify the color or select the color, if you're looking at the design review section of the code, you should be able to as Norma said, warm up those colors to try to make it a little more homey, a little more a little more, more of a Old Town Fairfax feel. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other members of the public with their hands raised. So I think what I'd like to do is I'm hearing consistency amongst the planning commissioners that we want change on this item. We have two options that are brought up in the packet. One is to direct staff to do it. One is to just continue the item to the next meeting. I didn't really get a chance to maybe give my comments, but I think you understood them from the beginning, just so I won't change that at all, but yeah. So is there anyone interested in making a motion to continue this item and with the direction to modify the color palette or any other changes? And Commissioner Fregoso.
Thank you. I would like to move continuance of this item in order that the owner and design team can take another look with bringing some more historic character, not creating such a stark and contemporary building. The flat facade is not the problem, but the severely modern look and feel. We suggested other design ideas, other color ideas, and I would like to have that come back to the Planning Commission.
Does anyone have a second?
I'd like to have a comment, if I may.
Yes, please.
Through the chair. So a couple of things. One is if we take a look at the design review criteria, element number 2 does mention color. It says only elements of design which have significant relationship to exterior appearance of structures and facilities shall be considered. These elements may include height, arrangement of the site, texture, material, color, signs, landscaping, and appurtenances. Now, one of the questions I actually had for the applicant was, she mentioned logos and coloring of signs, and there's an illustration in the plan that shows a 3 black signs basically on the facade, and I was wondering whether there's an intention. I mean, we may have to come back for sign approval, I suppose, is possible, but is there an intention to adopt? Well, there's 2 things, I guess. One is they appear to want to, which I kind of see and understand, want to have a neutral color up there so that whatever logos or signs the tenants want to put up would be compatible with that. But we do have sign ordinances. So color is a factor that we can consider, apparently. It wasn't removed from the design criteria. And I made my comment earlier, I'd like to see some warm colors. So continuance might be an option to get.
So are you seconding my motion or making a friendly amendment to it?
I'm seconding your motion and making a friendly amendment that the applicant please consider when they come back making warmer colors. One thing the applicant and others need to understand is there may be some trends that have developed over years that weren't intentional and that may be considered possibly even a chaotic departure from some norms. And I'm not suggesting that we have any kind of shopping center going on in downtown that we want to make everything conform perfectly either.
Okay, so we have a first and we have a second. Go ahead and take the roll call vote, please, staff.
Okay, Fregoso,
Aye.
Green,
Aye.
Swift,
No, and we didn't have a chance to have comments on the motion. But I would vote no on that. I think we can address this with the town working with them on colors that would meet the design review criteria, and we wouldn't have to bring this back. I would think that that's the only thing that I would be concerned about with the design review.
Through the chair, there are no comments on the motion, but if you wanted to make that a friendly amendment, that it not come back to the planning commission, that would be
I could not
acceptable,
support that.
though I would have to approve, I would have to accept that.
So go ahead with the vote, Linda. We heard Commissioner Swift.
Okay, so where was I? All right, and Chair Rodriguez.
Aye. So with a 3-1, then what happens, Linda?
The motion passed, so it's continued.
All right, thank you very much. So this item has been continued.
Can I make one final comment through the chair, please? Very quickly. At one time, Fairfax had a design review board and a planning commission. The design review board was subsumed by the planning commission. And so that design criteria, and as indicated in our general plan, still holds. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a
So
good
this item's
point.
now been continued to the February 18th meeting. The purpose of this is that we're waiting for revisions to both color and trying to look at to go to more warm colors. We've also heard some comments on potentially introducing copper goose lamps, blade signs, trying to introduce some elements of historic downtown as we see it, and as reflected in the staff report of the photos of downtown, but within your financial constraints that you're talking about, page 5 of the staff report. Okay, I think what we should do is just take a brief 5-minute break, and then we'll move on to the housing element update. Okay, we're going to go on to discussion item number 3, the housing element update, the work program discussion. We also have another work program discussion on item number 4, the housing and other general plan elements work plan was a continued item actually from the December 17th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting, where the planning director reviewed the 2015 through 2023 existing housing element and how many housing units were required at that time and how many were completed and under construction, and that there was still an unmet need at that time that will be carried over. And he reviewed even before that the 2022 and through 2030 numbers that we were going to be housing numbers that were going to be allocated to this municipality, which was 530 units is expected to be assigned to the town of Fairfax. And so I'll turn this over to Director Berto to discuss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this is going to be a major work program element for the town for the next 2 years. As your commission is well aware, this area in the state in general is in the midst of an affordable housing crisis. And the state has passed a variety of laws addressing that. One of the longer standing requirements is called a Regional Housing Needs Assessment, commonly referred to as a RHNA. And that is what we are mandated to start working on. And specifically, we do that via the housing element of the general plan. And it should be noted that the next planning period is actually 2023 to 2031. In order to meet the deadline to have a finalized updated housing element ready for certification by the state in January of 2023, the town would need to adopt the update to our housing element by the end of the year in 2022. So we're basically looking at 2 years to work that. Looking at what the Planning Commission and subgroup would be dealing with in the next 2 years, you see an outline as attachment A that describes a general work program that we would, with deliverables and timing that we would be facing during the next 2-year period. That this would be part of our developing numbers, a plan for creating housing, facilitating housing that is consistent with the regional housing needs assessment. At the time of the staff report, it was somewhat in play which housing number was actually adopted, but it appears now that the latest number for Fairfax is 490 total housing units in this next 8-year planning cycle. So that's what's involved with doing the housing element update. Is we have to figure out a way to come up with a feasible plan for providing that many housing units. Although not directly referenced in the requirement for general plan element update, it is anticipated that, well, actually, one of them is required, and that is the safety element. Under state law, the state has caught up to the fact that there's a lot of housing that it's been put in places that put people in considerable harm's way. As we're aware, there have been multiple fires destroying thousands of homes and killing dozens of people in the last year, really. And so what the state is doing with some recently passed legislation signed into law is to require that the towns also update their safety element to look at hazards and specifically items like evacuation planning. So we would be doing that as a requirement. Furthermore, it's anticipated that we would be taking a careful look at our land use element to determine what, if any, aspects of that would need to be updated concurrent with the housing element update. Let's see. Just as some background, the current regional housing needs assessment requires the town to provide 61 units of housing at a variety of income levels. And it's noted that the town has provided over 90 units to date, aided in large part to the 54 unit Victory Village housing development. When we planned for areas and locations with which to provide this housing in Fairfax in our current housing element, we identified locations that potentially would accommodate 144 housing units. And that's part of the attachment. You can see those specific sites, even though it's a little confusing because some of those didn't have street addresses, but that just gives you an idea of the type of work product that we would be developing as part of the housing element update, is to identify specific sites and having numbers assigned to those sites. It's also noted that the current housing element includes 48 programs, that the town will, as part of this work on the housing element, evaluate those programs along with the housing site inventory for bringing those into a current context and to be used as a planning tool for the next 8-year period. Other requirements by the state include an annual progress report, which the town has been doing on a timely basis. It's noted that the annual progress report is required and can affect the applicability of housing streamlined legislation. The town is currently subject to streamlined housing because we have not complied with our housing element requirements as of yet. So we are potentially subject to a streamlined multifamily housing project. Furthermore, in the prior, or the current, I should say, housing element, the town adopted a mitigated negative declaration pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act. And again, this was to come up with 61 units of housing at the variety of income levels. Staff believes or anticipates that an environmental impact report is likely to be required to address potential impacts from the 490 units of housing that would be required for this next housing element update cycle. The staff has already sent out a request for proposals to qualified environmental consulting firms to update the housing safety and land use elements. And I would emphasize that the land use element is more to make sure that we provide that ability as part of the consultant's proposals, so that we're not wrestling with trying to add that on. And we will be considering those proposals in the next several weeks. Let's see. And then in attachment A, as I referred to earlier, we do have a draft housing element work program outline. One of the requests I have of your commission is that we designate a subcommittee to work on this housing element update, picking out 2 commission members. I've met with the Affordable Housing Committee. They would like to be involved in some meaningful fashion in the housing element update. And given that we're dealing with the provision of at least 200 units of affordable housing, they certainly will be. Furthermore, in terms of putting together this housing element update subcommittee, staff recommends and will likely be going discussing this with the town manager to include 2 members of the Affordable Housing Committee on the subcommittee and consideration of additional members. And this might be something that is discussed by the town council. I'm not at that point yet. So my recommendations tonight are to review and provide direction to staff on the proposed work program and to select 2 commissioners. I realize there aren't too many here tonight. Maybe we can pick 2 that aren't here tonight and it'll serve them right. No, I'm just kidding. But select 2 commissioners to serve on an ad hoc housing element subcommittee. And I'm prepared to respond to questions and comments.
Thank you very much. I wanted to point out in a previous packet that Ben provided to us, it was dated October the 7th, and it was a letter from the mayor, Goddard, to ABAG, and it was around the methodologies used for determining this number of units and concern about fire, water, infrastructure capability, chronic water shortages, and others. So there are definitely a number of issues to be dealt with. And I'm wondering, Ben, if you can clarify a couple of things. You've asked for a couple of people to volunteer, but it seems like you need to clarify a little bit more about what is the consultant going to be doing and what are you asking of this committee? Are they more of a steering committee or are they a working group? How many times do you think they're going to be meeting? That's kind of the first question.
In terms of the role of the housing subcommittee, it would in part depend on what your commission's preference is. That it's not unusual in order to sort of keep the commission's deck cleared for the variety of things, and we'll get to that more as we discuss our upcoming work program, that we would have the subcommittee as a working group and to be doing some of the meetings with a consultant and then coming back to the commission, the overall commission, for direction and as part of the public outreach program. But part of that depends on where your commission envisions their role. It's possible that it would be more of a steering committee and that your commission would be taking on a greater portion of the public hearings and public outreach.
And was there anything about the timeline and schedule that you wanted feedback on, because it shows some time for public outreach, was there any a part of the schedule that you wanted some feedback on?
Well, we know that in Fairfax, it's a very involved community and that there will be multiple meetings. I believe in the request for proposal, I listed 10 public meetings, which seems like a high number, but it's not, as we know. This is going to be a very complex, comprehensive discussion that's going to take the town into areas that is really, it's never considered going before. And so you can look at those elements of the work program that are shown in the attachment A and, pencil in the course of the next 2 years, the public outreach programs. We have both a planning commission meetings, planning commission workshop, and those would be occurring through the spring and summer, with the workshop scheduled to take place in the fall.
You're muted, Michelle.
And Commissioner Swift.
I had a couple questions. Looking at the work program, there's nothing on here about the safety element. We have to do the safety element. And in my mind, working through the safety element is going to inform, in my mind, what our housing element potentially looks like. So I guess a question or a thought is that the work program and schedule for the housing element needs to include the safety element work. Because to me, the two go together and one informs the other, and there's nothing on here about that one. And Chair Rodriguez sort of asked, my question of what the expectation is for the housing, for the Planning Commission subcommittee, and I'm not still real clear on what the expectation is there. But a third comment was looking at the schedule, just a question, you've got select and hire a housing element consultant. And you've got a date on there of February 2012-1. Can you clarify what that is?
Next month. He's about to interview him and select him now.
So
That's 2021. That's a typo.
Okay. So do you think realistically you'd have a consultant on board next month?
Yes, I believe so. I'm already working on how we would go through the selection process. The timeline for submittal of proposals is for early February. So we do have, obviously we need to get going in terms of the overall work program. And it's you think, oh, you've got 2 years, but really when you look at where we have to get to by the end of 2022, the schedule needs to proceed apace. In terms of your question about the safety element, that's a very good comment, and certainly we could add the word safety element. It's also Commissioner Swift is probably aware that the county fire is going to be having a public meeting coming up to discuss some of their program initiatives. I believe that's on February 4th. And so some of the tie-ins and specific work aspects will depend on the information that we get from those other groups and how they are working. For example, I believe Chief Weber anticipated releasing at least a draft evacuation study in June or July of this year. And so that obviously will tie into, because that's one of the specific items that we have to look at as part of the safety element update, is the hazards relating to evacuation. So as we get more feedback from those groups, we'll know more about what is involved with the safety element update.
Right,
Uh,
and I believe Chief Weber would say he was being optimistic in his timeline for that. And I think, the question would be how that relates directly to Fairfax. And when you look at some of the legislation. So I still think that we have a target to meet for the housing element. And that to me is informed by our safety element. So I think within this, we still need to have those work items put into this schedule for our purposes and not look to what MWPA and the county is doing. It needs to be part of what our needs are to meet our housing element timeline. And even throwing in land use in there as well. If we need to review our land use element, that should be a part of this project work schedule as well, in my opinion.
And Ben, I've written and had certified by Cal OES and FEMA multiple safety elements that I've authored, and they're very comprehensive in terms of, you try to reach that level of approval to go up to FEMA because it qualifies you for a lot more funding possibilities, which I think is a benefit to the town. But there is particular criteria in terms of the number of public outreaches that you have, how much collaboration you have and with whom, having to document who you're collaborating with, what were the conversations, how many times you met, and so on. But the research that you're doing, the methodology for analyzing disasters, the incorporation in your approach to them, and how you're addressing not only identification of the hazard, but how you're mitigating them, how you're incorporating them and cross-referencing to other elements is a whole year to a year and a half by itself, and a separate consultant, I would guess, from your housing consultant that would have to kind of collaborate and kind of weave maybe in and out at some point.
Now, my question would be in doing a safety element, that was an overall safety element, correct? That's not just necessarily as it applies to the housing element update in certain components.
Correct.
Right. So that might be in the context of an overall. I would love to see your work products and kind of gain some of the knowledge that you've obviously put into that and have further conversations with you about that. Because as you and Commissioner Swift note, this has a direct bearing on where we go with our housing element.
Commissioner Green and then Fragoso.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This is a huge aspect of it, and the safety aspects, the evacuation routes, things like that we need to consider here quite a bit. And I would imagine, though, that any EIR analyst would be looking at these elements as well, at least certainly put them in touch with, Commissioner Rodriguez and make sure that they're understanding of the one route we have to exit here and what could happen in terms of a fire in a place like behind you there, Ben, and your scenery, and that coming down the canyon and all that stuff. So thank you. That was my comment. I agree with everything that's been said.
My turn. Am I on?
You are.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Two things I wanted to say. One is that, excuse me, Marin County is currently the boss, the next boss meeting is amending their building and zoning codes to incorporate wildfire planning and the closeness of roadways to new housing, specifically ADUs. But as you see, this opens up planning and site planning and land use strategies that can be incorporated in zoning ordinances and land use requirements. I'll send Ben and Michelle a copy of that and you can take a look. And secondly, not that it's up to me, but I would like to recommend, if they are willing, that Commissioner Rodriguez and Swift be the two members on that committee, given their expertise. Michelle generally with more generally with housing elements, not just that, and Cindy more specifically with the wildfire planning. But, you know, that's just me recommending you guys, throwing you into the fire.
So to speak.
You'd be great at it.
I think we should probably go to the public now and see if there's any members of the public who would like to contribute on this housing element discussion. Please raise your hand. We're not seeing any hands raised, so we'll come back to the Planning Commission. And what we have is the recommendation from staff that we review and provide direction to staff on the work program, select 2 commissioners to serve on the ad hoc committee. And looking at this timeline, initiating public outreach winter of 2020, 2021. When is that? When is that next bit? I mean,
That
when
would
do
have
we
been
really
last-
have to select?
that would have been
someone? Do we have
last
more discussion
winter.
about this at a future meeting or what then? Because this needs to be tightened up more, and we need to have this discussion more on the draft work program as well. And we don't have the scope of work on the consultant, so I don't want to volunteer until I understand, because I don't
No,
want
I understand.
I don't want a product to come out that's not reflective of kind of what I'd like to see.
Well, is the website begun? Is there anything on it yet? That's part of it.
Yes, Commissioner Green, we have put a link. We've indicated that the housing element update work, it has commenced. We've put a link to tonight's meeting's staff report. So we are starting the outreach process even before we hire the consultant. Obviously, given the limits on available staff resources in-house and the specialized nature of conducting a housing element update, as well as the safety element updates, et cetera. It's a job for the firm that will end up hiring. When I speak to winter, you know, it's right now. Is that as soon as we get those people on board, you know, probably one of their first work products will be to decide or come up with a strategy for meaningfully engaging with the public. You know, it was so much simpler when we could widely advertise a town hall meeting or a meeting at the Women's Club and, you know, get 100 people there and things like that. But, you know, in this virtual environment, we have seen that it tends to really constrain some of those opportunities. And that'll be one of the challenges for our work going forward.
So it would be
actually,
really nice
Ben,
to see a revision to this timeline to include when the historic document survey and the odds thing is going to be done as well, because I think that plays into this.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. It was a comment I made recently to a colleague, was that it's actually very valuable that we are approaching the time when they will have the draft toolkit that your commission discussed at the last time it was discussed. I forget what the date was on that. But we will have the full toolkit and begin those conversations, and those directly relate to the types of housing, and in particular multifamily housing, that we will be contemplating in Fairfax. So definitely part and parcel of that work product, and we will be integrating what we develop out of that, and the historic analysis, obviously, which is really kind of being integrated into the objective design and development standards as we speak.
And I'd rather see like a steering committee of the 2 planning commissioners, 2 town councils, and the consultant and the planning director, and then a working group where we're putting content to them like fire, transportation, utility, maybe some more of the low income housing, you know, some safety folks, where we're sending them specific content to think about and having them come back. But it has to weave in and out of the consultant's scope of work, you know, pretty delicately, because there's a bunch of stuff that company is going to have to produce pretty quickly in terms of updating the inventory update and the program, the existing housing elements. What's the gaps? What's already been completed? Let's get that out. What has to be put in? What's the, you know, what are the gaps in infrastructure? I mean, how many housing units can we really build with the caps on the existing infrastructure that will help to guide us? Then, you know, some analysis on ADUs and how many on average we build per year. And if we can project how many over the length of it, then really the gap in the number of housing units we have to provide is anything above that. So that's really the number we should be designing towards. And, you know, so that's how, I mean, I'd rather see it kind of tiered that way. I don't want to be in there working it. I don't have that kind of time. Commissioner Swift?
Yeah, well, one of the challenges, of course, is to have multiple subgroups. And I think that's one of the concerns is that, yeah, you know, ideally we would have a tiering and have the oversight, and then that people who are actually working on the specific items. I'm not sure that we would be able to serve that many groups, but anyway, I'll see what other commissioners think.
Ben, when do you need identification of 2 planning commissioners? Considering that there's 4 of us here and 2 are absent, do you need those 2 identified or recommended tonight? Can it wait to the next meeting? Can email go out to the other 2 to see if there is interest with the other 2? I mean, it would be something I'd consider participating in, but then I don't know what your time frame is for needing individuals identified, and we have 2 that aren't here.
Right, which makes it a little bit more complex. I would prefer to not wait until the February Planning Commission meeting. I mean, I suppose it's possible. It's unlikely that the consultants would be doing anything substantive by that date. This also ties into the agenda item, 2 items from now, where we talk about additional planning commission meetings. And, you know, if we don't make a decision tonight, and I understand, you know, with 3 commissioners or 2 commissioners anymore, absent that, it would be desirable to have the full commission to see what people's interest and availability is. But, you know, we could probably push it to February. Keep in mind that we will likely be discussing the objective design and development standards toolkit at that meeting also.
Well, if there is interest from the members here, and Norma's made 2 suggestions, and you put out a call to the other 2 to see what their interest is, maybe it could be done possibly before the February meeting.
Commissioner Green?
Yeah, while you were talking, I was looking at the website, and there's just nothing really accessible by the public coming into the Fairfax town website that's obvious about this huge discussion. So while we're initiating public outreach, I think we want to make it as friendly and easy as possible. As it is, we hardly get public outreach. I mean, Frank Egger is good enough to bring us, you know, his wonderful historical and interesting perspectives, and we get a few other regular people, and you kind of know who the typical suspects are in a way, but you don't get a lot of public. You know, there's a whole generation moving into Fairfax who's completely uninvolved. And this has been my theme while I was chair and continuing, is just So I think we need to get a web page up front rather than hiding it behind, my God, Town of Fairfax /documents. How do you get there? Housing /element. And it's the last one. It's not the new one. I mean, it's not a discussion of what ABAG is doing. One of the things the new kind of federal administration is doing is being really upfront with people, not hiding anything. One thing we've learned a lesson over the years on this planning commission is don't spring anything new on people at the last minute. This is really important in this town. So I'm recommending that we shift a front page, you go to the Town of Fairfax website. I've been involved in designing websites, believe it or not, since '93. And it should be one of those like disaster preparedness, elections. It should be, 2022 ABAG requirements box. Hit that and get all your information right there. That's all.
Go for it.
Go so.
Thank you. I say go for it, Mr. Green. Two comments. Ben, you pretty well outlined the scope of all the missing pieces, all the pieces that will have to fall into place. Just a brief comment. There's two items. I don't want to go into a big discussion about it, but that I'd like us to keep in mind and discuss maybe at our next session. One is to have if you could give us a review of the previous density bonus requirements with respect to affordable housing proposals, how those are changing with state law, or if we still are bound by those and we might want a refresher on them. It was, there were a number of concessions that needed to be made depending on affordability levels. The other thing I would like to add to this list, which does not seem evident, is a review of or a creation of green building codes, a general topic under our housing element for green building codes that has many ramifications in a lot of different ways. And then finally, I would like to highly recommend Lizo Blash from the Affordable Housing Committee, who's very knowledgeable about affordable housing. And I believe she'd be willing to join this subcommittee. I like the chair's idea of having two people from council, two people from the Affordable Committee, from planning, having it broader. And my final comment is that I agree with Commissioner Green that there's not, we need, let me put it this way, we need information online as of today or tomorrow if possible, so that we can show people who don't seem to bother or never quite find it, or they don't have the time, or they're struggling with whatever during this pandemic year and don't see these very lengthy processes that the town goes through to talk about a housing element, to talk about safety elements. And it isn't until the last minute when we go to council or we're trying to make a final decision after having 100 meetings that people come up and say, I haven't heard anything about this. You never told us anything. We need to document the information online in a way we can prove, look at this process, and put it in our newsletters and get it out in Nextdoor and get it out so that at the end of the process, the naysayers can't just come back and say, oh, I never heard about the process. And there, I'm done. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. So we have a recommendation that Commissioner Swift and Rodriguez participates. It sounds like Commissioner Swift is interested, but maybe checking with the other commissioners about whether they are interested. I'm happy to participate. It'll be interesting. we'll see. So let us know, Ben, if either of the other two want to participate. If not, I'm going to recommend, pretty quickly that we start rocking and rolling, because, and what that means is kind of really clarifying what the consultant scope's going to do and what are we going to provide to the public. I mean, besides this initial communication, which is critical, I think that Cindy and I should work on getting regular newsletters in the town managers, weekly updates about that this is starting. But we don't want to start talking about that until we have some idea of where there's going to be an opportunity for people to participate. So we got to
Could we get a copy of the RFP for the HE consultant, Ben? I'd like to see a copy of the RFP. It would give me an idea of what they're doing and their timeline.
Okay.
Then did you hear Commissioner Fregoso?
Yes.
Okay,
Mike.
sorry. Okay, all right. Well, thank you everybody for your wonderful and the public's feedback on that item. Ben, let us know as soon as you know what's going on. Moving on to item number 4, this is kind of an extension of this last item, really talking about a review of commission draft work programs and priorities for the rest of the fiscal year and for upcoming fiscal year 2022. And this is also an opportunity for you or me to bring up, anything that we think would be appropriate for us to work on, and then how does it relate then to this other work that we're doing. So I'll leave it up to Ben first, and I'd love to bring up some of my suggestions that have been on my list for a long time.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. Yes, this was a request by the chair at the last meeting, and it certainly is timely, given that we are on the precipice of many major work program items. As noted in the report, 2020 just threw a monkey wrench into everything in some ways, and we've been kind of reinventing how we do public meetings, are still in that process. I dare say I'm already looking at how we proceed as we start to get further into the recovery from this COVID pandemic. But along with that, we have several major work program elements proposed in the next year. The first is something that the Planning Commission has been already considering, and that is the Objective Design and Development Standards, regulations and standards. And as part of this multi-jurisdictional effort that the county is cooperating on, and I might do a little plug for our ability here in this county to coordinate and share resources and get work programs like what you will see coming forward very shortly from the design team that's working on these odds. That's unusual, and we're given to understand from ABAG that really no other countywide effort has been occurring in the Bay Area county. So I think we will see the benefit of that, as the chair noted, jumping into our housing element and looking at the implications for the numbers of housing units that we will be expected to somehow plan for. And so having regulations that are still applicable in today's regulatory environment, where your commission and indeed anybody who has been paying attention is aware that local jurisdictions have lost so much control, authority, and discretion in the ability to review projects. So I think this odds work will be critical in Fairfax being able to provide standards to potential developers in this town as we look at those housing numbers coming in possibly into Fairfax. So that's going to be coming up in the spring. And just as a warning to the two ad hoc odds and historic subcommittee members, I will be sending out an agenda. I would have sent it out, or not an agenda, scheduling request. I would have done it already if I wasn't dealing with a little bit of congestion here. But that will, I hope, occur prior to the next Planning Commission meeting, where we can discuss this draft toolkit and then bring it before your commission either at the February meeting, I hope, or certainly at the next meeting following that. Another one, and you've heard it so many times, and I don't know what to say about this, is the Mirenda Heights subdivision. As noted in my report, the developer did contact me and say that he anticipates funding shortly, very shortly. We've heard it before. Meanwhile, we've just been sort of waiting for it to arrive. If and when that does occur, and certainly in today's development climate, if it's likely to occur, it should be occurring soon. I don't mean should, but you know, the chances of it happening at all, it seem like today's environment is the most likely situation. So if that gets going, that's going to be a major chunk of time. I don't see that being occurring at a subcommittee level. That will be a front and center planning commission meeting or many meetings. So that's something that, you know, we've been waiting. Hopefully we don't have to sit there and wonder too much longer. Ridgeline Scenic Corridor mapping, I guess, you know, we're ending up with a situation where it's 2-2. I'll figure out how to apply that direction as we go forward. The housing element update, as your commission just commented, a whole bunch of work, more details to follow, but a work product that's due in 2 years. And we'll be working on that with the consultant and the subcommittee. Inclusionary housing, this is one of these things where Senate Bill 2 provided some grant opportunities. There are a number of marine jurisdictions, including perhaps surprisingly Fairfax, that do not have an inclusionary ordinance. And even those that did, given the state's ongoing changes to their housing requirements, need to modify those inclusionary housing requirements. So that's a work that's occurring by a consultant and will be coming to the town in sometime in 2021. Reach codes, and I believe the chair will have some more detailed information insofar as she sounds like she sat in on the Climate Action Committee meeting. But this is something that would be a modification to the town's energy efficient codes. And it looks as though there is some strong interest in modifying the town's codes. It's not clear to what extent the Planning Commission would be involved in that, as this is largely construction codes. And this is sort of an implementation of those codes. But I look forward to feedback from the commission. And then miscellaneous housing regulations. If we've seen anything, it's that every year the state has a new slate of housing regulations. It's pretty fascinating to see the analysis of the regulations, because, you know, it's really coming down to, okay, they changed this, which doesn't, you know, is inconsistent with, you know, this, but it really, you know, you just look at these analyses and they say, well, this is where the regulations are saying the same thing about this topic. And this is where they're saying one says you have to do it and one says don't do it. And I'm just hoping, frankly, that now that we're into this housing element update, that we don't have a bunch of mid-course corrections, but I'm sure that's wishful thinking. Other aspects include other planning commission initiatives, zoning amendments, and other priorities. Staff believes that with what we have absolutely on our table looking forward, you know, starting in the next meeting and going forward for the next 2 years, that we're going to be plenty busy. But certainly if there are specific interests of commissioners, we can try to fold that into the priority list. So that's my report, and I'm looking forward to comments.
thank you very much. I just wanted to say that I outreached to both the Climate Action Committee as well as the Tree Committee.
Uh-oh.
You're muted.
Michelle? Yeah, you,
Thanks. I outreached to the Tree Committee as well as the Climate Action Committee to ask them if there was any particular work plan items that they'd like us to consider. And it just so happens the Climate Action Committee had recently adopted an ordinance. So what this has to do with is in March of 2019, the town adopted a resolution that said there would be 0 greenhouse gases by 2030. And then subsequent to that, the Climate Action Committee adopted a resolution in December, essentially that proposing an all-electric municipal code for new construction. And so they're starting to kind of look into what are the pros and cons of doing that or not. And so in my mind, if we were in support of something like that, we would be able to still put it forward as that is something that we do think is an appropriate ordinance to do. And my thinking is the whole work plan would go up eventually to the town council and they would add or delete whatever they thought was appropriate anyway. So I do kind of agree in just looking a little bit further into, because what they had reviewed.
You're muted.
The proposed climate action plan that will be submitted to the town council, which is an updated greenhouse gas analysis, shows that the next greatest contributor to greenhouse gases is from natural gas use. So that's why they're proposing an all electric ordinance. And they have all kinds of ideas, you know, around it that they're still kind of looking at and the pros and cons. So I'm interested if it's something that does fall in our purview. I'd like to express to the town council that that is something that we would like to see. The tree committee had kind of two different things. One was kind of the resolve of the issue that's kind of ongoing that Commissioner Swift was assigned to, which was kind of wrapping up this issue of lack of communication and clarity when the fire marshal is approving landscape improvement plans or, you know, those kind of things, and us interpreting that when it gets to the planning commission level as an approval, and it's showing on the plan itself as being, you know, clear cutting. You know, that's one of them, kind of clearing that up, whose role and responsibility is what. The other one was if the tree committee recommends, I'll just read it. If the tree committee recommends to the commission removal of trees, then those trees cannot be removed until the project has received final approval from planning. So what's been happening is that trees are being removed before they've gotten through the whole planning process. And so there's a disconnect when we are requiring that story poles be put up and it's not really clear what's in the plan set. So this would require an ordinance modification to kind of clarify the interrelationship between tree removal applications and processes between the tree committee and planning commission projects that get approved. So that's the two things. One other thing that came forward had to do with where is my notes, had to do with EV charging. And there is a required state law, and of course I've lost my note. There's a required state law, here it is, AB 1236, that requires cities and counties adopt an ordinance to create an expedited streamlining permit process for electric vehicle charging stations. And there's a whole bunch of model ordinances out there. It's essentially saying if you meet all of these things, then you essentially just go and get your electrical permit. You don't have to go through a bunch of process. And we don't have anything on the book. So that's another, opportunity. So those are the things that I'm thinking. Maybe it's not all this year, but we have to think about what could really be good. And I love greenhouse gas reduction things. And I think EV vehicles and all electric stuff and clarifying the tree stuff is right up in there in my support. How about anybody else? Commissioner Fregoso and then Swift.
Thank you. Yes, I am dumbfounded with the list of projects, the work program that will be required to develop this year. Some of it very exciting, but yes, it's enough work for twice as many of us. I believe we shouldn't really add a bunch of stuff to the staff list. However, I do agree with the chair's suggestion in collaboration with the tree committee and the climate action committee about moving forward some greenhouse gas emissions. I have in the past asked staff, but I understand the incredible constraints you guys have been under over the last 4, 5, 6 months. We had talked once about a greater relationship with the Climate Action Committee, which we don't, I believe we don't have staff who has the time to attend it. It would have to be one of the commissioners who attends those. And also I notice there's a process going on where the council makes a decision to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by a certain time, but without identifying a process by which to do so. And then the Climate Action Committee is proposing what I think is a good idea at time of changing, going all electric, particularly new construction. I think if you're doing new construction, you should be totally solar, totally non-electric, all on batteries. You should be recycling, reclaiming all your water. You should have swales, the whole enchilada, and protect the owls at the same time. However, we need that to go into a green REACH code. We've also asked staff about REACH codes. The county has them, many cities have them. San Anselmo has an EV ordinance, what the chair was talking about. You go to the counter, you get your permit. You go and all you have to do is get an electrical permit to install, if you need one, to install a charger, and TAM will give you money for it. The other issue, but we need to do it all, not just the houses have to be not electric, or not just the EV has to be separate. We need to incorporate all of this green code, I call it, lack of a better word, into this new housing element and this land use that we're currently doing, because that's where we have policy and teeth to do stuff like this. You can't just expect the Planning Commission, who, as you see, has been left out of this entire greenhouse gas emissions policies that people are drafting, with no coordination with us. So we're like the lone rangers out here. And it needs to be brought into a comprehensive aspect of the general plan and the housing element, that we green them. And while I understand that the Planning Commission has a good amount of purview in generating these types of ordinances, as the chair said, it still is basically the town council that must adopt an ordinance and not the planning commission. But I do believe we should add this component the chair brings to us, but in its broader, fuller application into our housing element work program as the most appropriate place to accommodate. And I think the time is right for things to happen. The other thing we need to add is elimination of generators, because my bed vibrates at night when we have the power outages with the gigantic generators. Okay, I get it. Some people have solar options. Some people don't have solar options. Some people have the resources, but a lot of people don't have the resources. But the Planning Commission cannot require the use of solar power, cannot require people not to have a gigantic generator 5 feet from my property line without the town policies and ordinances that allow us to make those decisions. And so, let's put this into our work program and come up with our green building code.
Commissioner Swift and then Green.
So speaking to the chair's comments on the tree committee and a tree code, I think our tree ordinance, we've reviewed it once for process. I mentioned this at a meeting or two ago, that I think the whole ordinance needs to be reviewed. But I think, as I've talked to tree committee members, they theoretically are working on draft changes. They're working on communication with the community. I think the other piece of that is it's not only the ordinance that needs to be reviewed comprehensively, but it's also the processes that we have and the forms. Some of the things that are mentioned by the chair, things that, you know, are addressed on the forms, and the forms haven't kept up with the process changes that we've made in the tree ordinance. As to the all electric, the chair has mentioned that the Climate Action Committee is just starting to look at that feasibility, things like that. I am not in favor of the Planning Commission doing anything with that at this point in time. It is too early. And some of the things that are addressed in that, as the planning director said, and I think this may also go to the, you know, the personal home charging stations. Those are building code related items and not things that would be part of Planning Commission. I think, as the director has said, we probably have more on our plate this year than we've had past years. A couple of years ago, we all got together and had a workshop on work plans for the Planning Commission, and we all came up with a list of items. We all had items on that. I was taking a quick look at that. We may have, touched on a couple of those, but I don't think this is the year to add anything onto the plate that we already have. When I was thinking about things that I would like to see done, I think, it might be an opportunity to throw in a couple code corrections in there. We come across the last years, every time we look at a code, we either find something that's an error and it stays there because we don't get back and correct it, or we make a modification to one part of the code, in the same section, and don't do anything else with the rest of it, even if we see something there. So maybe it's an opportunity to take a step or two to making those changes and corrections, because as we note, as we read through the code that we have, it's not always clear. But as far as adding any large initiatives that would come under the Planning Commission purview, I don't think this is the year to do this. I think we're going to be busier than we have been the last couple of years, even with the things that we've tackled in the last couple of years. So those are my thoughts.
And could you just clarify what were the top code corrections that come to mind for you?
I'd have to pull up a list. I don't have them in front of me,
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Green.
but I could do that.
Well, I agree with you and Commissioner Swift, but we have, I mean, the chair's list of additional items that we need to go over is valid. We do need to do that. And Commissioner Swift's idea that we have at least a half dozen codes that we've scratched our heads on in the last year and 2 years and going back. But I'd agree with, we do not need to add anything to this huge list of what we're doing this year. But bear in mind some of these things that we want to do, so that while we're going through, you know, other codes, if there seems to be some related way that we can fix something, you know, so it might be great if Commissioner Swift came out with a list of those ordinances that we were doing that with. So my quick remark is really, we don't need to add to this, but we do need to bear it all in mind. But one thing I would like to request is that very quickly, maybe February, we can get a evening with the town attorney who can quickly go over the current changes to state law, so that we can figure out, you know, where we are with things and where we need to go. And that might help us prioritize all this stuff. You know, so I think that would be a great idea. The wall property is going to be what it is, and I expect we'll have a huge audience for that. I have sent Linda an email saying I could not attend 2 meetings per month this year. It would just not be feasible for me. And I can't join a subcommittee this year either. I'd love to. I would love to do that, but it's just, but reality is that. So I'd love to get a legal review of where we are, and as soon as possible. And I'd like to see, you know, all of these things taken into consideration, but not to increase the list of a heavy list of things we're doing. Okay, thank you.
To hear from any members of the public who'd like to address the Planning Commission work plan. If you're interested in speaking on this item, can you please raise your hand? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I still do recommend, Ben, that you take, you know, the communications from this group to the town council, so that they're aware of, you know, at a minimum, staffing workload. If along with our communication that we're really interested in tightening up between various committees that are working and what's going on through the Planning Commission and some of the difficulties. I mean, I don't see why we couldn't still list some of these things that are obviously hanging out there, like the generators, like the tree ordinance, like the zoning code corrections, like the EV vehicle. Although we recognize we just don't have time for those right now, let them kind of look at your list and this other stuff and give us some feedback on what they're thinking about this. I think it's important to loop to them and then loop back to us on that. If you could do that, it would be great.
If we're going to do that, though, then it might be a good idea for all of us to look back at what we looked at 2 years ago and prioritized just from a review standpoint. Some of that may still be relevant.
Was that the list of what was in the housing element, excuse me, the general plan program implementation, or what was that list?
It was that workshop that we did on where we all prioritized, right, part of that general plan, but it was also things like the code changes and some of the things that planning wanted as well. So it was just that January 2018 workshop we did where we came up with a list.
Boy, do you remember that? I don't remember that.
Well,
I have a big hard drive on my laptop.
Do you
yeah,
remember?
I remember 317 general plan policies that were assigned to, and the Planning Commission distilled it down to what I jokingly refer to as the dirty dozen. And as Commissioner Swift notes, reality and priorities intervene. In point of fact, in talking to Linda, we've done more code changes since I've been on board than she can recall ever doing in a similar period of time. And some of that reflects, the obvious, where you pick a chapter, any chapter, and you can see, the need or the benefit of updating. Of course, seeing that and then saying, well, let's come up with a map for 100-foot vertical could be, an 8-meeting, 225 situation. And, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just, it's one thing to say, hey, let's work on generators. And then you say, well, the council looked at that already and, never made a decision. So there are needs, and I am constantly impressed by the perspicacity of your commission. And based on my limited knowledge of community needs and expressions, you're reflecting those concerns and those needs because certainly, we could all look at the tree ordinance, for example, and I'm delighted to hear that the tree committee is kind of picking up that ball and running with it because, yeah, you just glance at it and you can see that. And even if you say, well, what it addresses, the fact that you get into fire requirements and there's real questions about where those start and stop. So I appreciate the commission's, support for that effort, and hopefully the tree committee will continue to do that. In terms of climate action committee, reach codes, things like that, that is moving forward. And I think that when you consider for new houses, it's an idea whose time has come. There's questions about will solar work in significant portions of the town that are facing north and in a wooded forest. You'd have to make some allowances. One of the things, just in terms of feasibility pertaining to that topic, the state has some very specific requirements in terms of, well, if you're going to make your standards more stringent than the state standards, you need to have a detailed study. The county has done that study, and that's why the efforts that Fairfax appears to be undertaking would closely mirror, if not match, the county's requirements. And that simply, again, reflects the fact that there's a very limited amount of bandwidth to kind of digress from people who've already undertaken those very expensive, comprehensive studies. So all this comes together. And I'm happy to bring that to the council. Hopefully it won't be 1 a.m, 4 meetings from now, but we'll see how it goes.
So is that what you are thinking about in terms of a follow-up, or what are you hearing about in terms of the town council thinking about work plans for their own subcommittees? We've got all these meetings going on. We're one of them. When are they thinking about taking this on? Do we need to schedule a special meeting with them? I mean, how do we take this list now? You've even got the inclusionary housing ordinance in here, which is an incredibly important thing. What are you suggesting?
Well, I think we've got, as several commissioners have noted, we've got our plates absolutely full up to the brim. And this isn't even considering a hypothetical project like Mirenda Heights, which will go from,
Blow everything up.
to red hot in one meeting and stay that way for the rest of the project. When the applicant comes up with the money to initiate the EIR. So that's one of the challenges. I see this as kind of just a presentation saying, look, this is what the Planning Commission, who has their, own concerns and perspective, thinks should be kept in mind. I think practically speaking, we're going to be looking at what staff has written in that staff report and very little more, especially given that we know that there's probably a half a dozen items that we haven't even thought about, and perhaps the council hasn't thought about that, but that we will have to react to. An example of something that we had to do a quick pivot on was the accessory dwelling unit changes. And, I'm proud to say that Fairfax, I believe, was one of two, or maybe the only jurisdiction in the county that had new ADU regulations in place as of January 1, when the new laws took place, which of course in the state's lovely manner rendered all local ordinances completely void if you didn't have an ordinance that was completely consistent with state regulations. And I dare say we've got some things in our ADU ordinance that, again, reflect Fairfax's unique wants and desires. So that's what we're always trying to do, is to figure out what it is this town wants. We know that, as befits a very unique community, it will be different than everybody else's, and reflect that going forward. And we'll do our best. But again, we also need to be realistic. And, we already have one commissioner who's indicated that his ability to do multiple meetings per month for a 2-year period is going to be pretty grim. So we need to keep that in mind also.
Well, I mean, maybe I do want to see our thoughts being communicated to the town council in some way, and whether we can do it or not. Okay, fine. But I think that they need to understand that we're dealing with a lot of things that are way behind, and they need to be aware of what we're seeing and what we're feeling like we're behind in, whether they think we can do the work or not. So I'm still feeling like this item needs to be, somehow needs to come back, that Cindy needs to look up the codes, that somehow either we're writing them a memo to just say, this is, our thoughts for this year. And maybe we can take this time in the next month to think about, what are we communicating? Maybe it's not a work plan item, but maybe it's just, not that we're going to take it on, but these are some of the things we're thinking about that are out there, and just, I don't know, something like that. I'll maybe stop there, because I feel like we don't really want to, there's nothing real, another action to take on it right now, and maybe just bring it back and re-talk about it again next month.
Just through the chair, there's one idea that we did a couple of times, and that is having one maybe or two joint meetings with the town council and or meetings with these committees that are doing some of the work, the tree committee, the climate action committee, and have actually a joint meeting so that we can kind of coordinate, get things together and get viewpoints aired. And that can work pretty well, I think, to help move things.
It worked well
along.
with the open space committee.
And it did. That's right, for sure. It worked well.
You can, actually doing things virtually is sometimes better than trying to do them in person.
Okay, so that's helpful. I think that's really helpful. So how does this now, Ben, relate to item number 5 and holding 2 planning commission meetings a month? I mean, is it really a ready discussion, since we don't really have a clear work plan in front of us at this point? Is this something that really needs to be discussed at this point?
Well, yes. What you're seeing is the other shoe dropping. It's not fair to say let's change the world one step at a time, or several steps concurrently, and not talk about the reality of what we're facing time-wise. As we know, we like to evaluate things very thoroughly, whether those are awnings or generators. And so we need to give applicants their due at meetings. be as that may, we've also got these things which I heard described as huge tonight, and I completely agree with that. When you take 50 years worth of housing production and say, hey, local jurisdiction, our expectation is you're going to plan for that and you're going to come up with that plan in 2 years. It's a pretty daunting task. So that's where you just say, yeah, we might as well, if we don't come to some conclusion in the fact that there's only 4 commissioners here tonight. And by the way, thank you very much, the 4, because when you drop down to 4, there's always a question, does somebody, get caught up in a traffic jam or, somehow their computer crashes. So I really appreciate the fact that, we covered a lot of ground at this meeting, and that was because you all are here and soldiering on. So looking at item number 5 and the meeting discussion. And I want to start by saying that this isn't captured in stone. Principal Planner Neil really did a lot of the heavy lifting on this report, and I appreciate that. She spoke to the town clerk. This concept of special meetings, we believe, has a lot of merit. It certainly affords us flexibility, and I'm not here to ask anybody to attend more night meetings than they need to. I think that if we are working on things like the housing element with a subcommittee, somehow a working group doing a lot of the work, we may be able to reserve the commission meetings and workshops for work products that they may generate. But we know we're going to need more meetings. And so the question is, what's the best way to do it? There's 2 reasons why we came up with the recommendation, which is to go and move our Thursday meetings from the 3rd Thursday of the month, and this is the regular meeting, to the 2nd Thursday. And I'm, completely neutral about whether that would actually be the 2nd Thursday or the 4th Thursday. But the idea is twofold. Number one, the town council has already decided to get through their agendas. They need to meet twice a month. And so that's on the 1st and 3rd Wednesdays of the month. They had their meeting last night. Thus far, the town manager, thank you, Garrett, has managed to avoid scheduling planning items for the 3rd Wednesday of the month, because what happens then is you're sitting there till I'm sitting there. Let me make that clear. Till very late at night at the town council, typically. And then I have to go before your commission the very next night. And that can be very challenging. I'll be honest. I like to be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for your commission, because you folks keep me on my toes, and there's a lot of very thorough analysis and discussion, and coming from a midnight meeting or something, it makes it more challenging. So the idea is to shift the planning commission so that it's on an alternating week for that basis. So we don't get in a situation where we have town council planning commission on the 1st week of the month and town council planning commission on the 3rd week of the month. The easy option would be to go 2nd and 4th, pick a week that would be the regular meeting. The other benefit it has, and this is staff level, our own logistics and requirements, and the planning commission is welcome to take it as it is. But we tend to put together our packets on Thursdays and Fridays the week prior to our meetings. And I'm talking about the town clerk and the town manager for the town council, and planning staff for the planning commission. And
It's
Michelle
too much.
Rodriguez, the town clerk's been great working with the shift of the town council meeting to Friday. But I can tell you that there are times when either one of us has the all available space, the copier, et cetera, tied up. And you can see where when we're working on housing element updates or something else that requires a lot of copying and production, and along with the town council, we're going to run into problems. So that's why I'm simply saying it's so much easier if we do alternating weeks. So that's the schedule recommendation, and I'll turn it over to your commission.
So it seems like we've really got 2 really almost distinct things to discuss. One is whether we want to even switch meeting days of the week to accommodate staff's conflicting schedule and production challenges. That's kind of one issue. And then the other is whether we really believe that we need to have a second meeting given the workload, but is it really more staff tightening up reports and having more work really happen in the subcommittees or through consultants and through staff tightening up things before it gets to us. So, and I'm more of that person. So commissioners, let's see, I think Fregoso was first, then Green, then Swift.
Thank you. I also see it as two separate things. The one thing that it appears would be most helpful to staff is if we can change our third Thursday commission meeting to the second Thursday, right? Ben?
Correct. Yes.
So that would be our regular meeting. Typically now, this Thursday, the third Thursday, would be the second Thursday of the month, regardless of whether or not we have another meeting. I think we can separate the decisions. Can people make, frankly, I don't have a problem making the second Thursday as opposed to the third Thursday of the month for a regular commission meeting. The question of another meeting is another issue. Perhaps if people are willing to change to the second Thursday of the month to accommodate the council meetings and staff use of the Xerox machine, I completely understand that. Are we then willing to have another meeting of the Planning Commission? That would be on the fourth Thursday of the month. Are we willing to make that a tentative date? If something comes, I mean, do we want to make it a fixed date, or do we want to make it, let's keep that available if we need to for our subcommittee meetings or to do a joint meeting with another group or whatever, but maybe not book it for every single month unless it's really critical. Those are two ways to look at it.
Commissioner Green.
Right. So this year I've had trouble making one meeting a month and being fully prepared. I don't like to make these meetings not fully prepared. This is just my personal, my workload is higher than it was. COVID has had the opposite effect on my business than it's had on others. But you know, if there's a 6:30 meeting and there's pizza, or if there's a 10 a.m. meeting and there's breakfast, how we'll do that, I don't know. I'll have to get some delivery services to go from house to house. I'm only kidding.
Can you do a Tuesday meeting, a second Thursday instead of a third?
It wouldn't make any difference to me. The first question, which Thursday of the month it is, doesn't matter to me, really. If it's a Thursday night at 7, that's fine. If it's 2, I mean, I'd have to take it also, for me, this is personal, on a month-by-month basis. There might be a month I can make it. There might be a month I can't. So that's how it is for me.
Okay.
Also, another request is that we have a replacement commissioner. We don't have a full house. And we
You
need
got someone in your pocket?
hopefully someone who can just kind of jump into the seat and go with our ridiculous agenda this year. You know, someone really, maybe Frank would like to do it again. I don't know, Frank Egger on that.
The advertisement is already out. So yes, I agree.
And I'm sending it to people already. Commissioner Swift.
So there's, as Norma said, there's a couple issues. One, for our regular meeting, whether all of us can change it or willing to change it from the third Wednesday. And if so, third Thursday, sorry. And if so, what other Thursdays would fit for them. So that's really a poll of all 6 commissioners to find out what their schedules are like, because there may be some that have other things going on other Thursdays, and that's for the regular meeting. I think, as Ben said, and if there are problems that way, then leaving it on the 3rd Thursday would be fine, where all the commissioners have the availability. I think, as you mentioned, Ben, Garrett's been good about keeping planning related items off that council special meeting so that you don't have to do back to back. I think as far as kind of the issue of putting things together in the town office from staff's point of view, shouldn't be the main issue and concern for us as far as moving our date. So I think the first one is finding out from the commissioners, what Thursdays they have available, and if they can move their 3rd Thursday to another one, and if so, which one could they do? Because I think the commission members are going to have to drive that part of it. The second part is the second meeting. And you talked in the staff report about regular meetings and special meetings. And special meetings, just like with the council, are meetings that don't include open time. And, so it is kind of abbreviated as far as the parts of the meeting. What we've done in the past, and we all know, we had multiple meetings for cannabis, and we had multiple meetings for Victory Village, but those weren't scheduled on the calendar as a regular meeting and a special meeting every month. So I think what I would like to see is what we have done in the past when we've needed to have an additional meeting in a month, a special meeting on a topic or whatever, is to do that on an ad hoc basis as we've done in the past. And in that way, we could pick a different day of the week if we needed to. It's not scheduled for a definite day. So that would be my preference, is to do special meetings scheduled as we need them, and do the scheduling as we've done in the past. And that can be, more flexible as far as the day of the week and the availability.
Thank you. So it sounds like, Ben, that there is interest in supporting staff and changing the date of the meeting, but you need to do like a doodle poll of folks on whether the 3rd Thursday or whatever other date you said is going to work for everybody, and figure out what date it is. And you've got support for that. In terms of 2 meetings, it's really mixed. And I'm in agreement with Phil. I didn't sign up to meet twice a month. This is not a paid job for me. I'm not interested in it. I have a personal life that I'm interested in after retirement. So I'm that's how I feel. Okay, so why don't...
Yeah, just in terms of the ad hoc and things, look, nobody's doing this because they enjoy it. I mean, well, excuse me. Let me clarify that. The extra meetings is this is something that staff sees the need to do so. And the challenge with saying, okay, now let's go find a meeting date because we need to discuss the housing element or odds or this, and we have a full agenda. And, I would define a full agenda as 3 private applications, not including Mirenda Heights. If we have Mirenda Heights, that's going to take all the bandwidth of that meeting. So the challenge is that if we have to sit there and do doodle polls every time we want to get the commission together, it's not going to work. I've done multiple meetings that way where I'm doing 30 emails into scheduling a meeting, and that's why I'm simply saying that if we can. I don't hear anybody saying they're conflicted out. I respect the fact that people have jobs, and that makes it much more difficult. But this is just one of those fair warning things that if we see the need to have that meeting, we may we may be doing that on a fairly regular basis. So, and I appreciate your commission's
The
support.
warning system seems to be early because they haven't submitted any money, and so there's really almost nothing to talk about yet.
Correct.
Okay. All right, so let's go on to the minutes from December 17. One of the things that I just wanted to point out is the critical nature of having commissioners look at the final decisions, like whoever moved the item and like seconded the item and articulated the decision needs to look at those for each one of these, because the chair then has to review the resolution and sign the resolution consistent with it. And I've just started to do that and they're not consistent. So I've had to go back and listen to the tape, compare it to what's on here, and then compare it to the resolution and go through iterations of revisions on the resolution. So, so as an example, in this minutes, like on page 10, Commissioner Fregoso and Gonzalez Harbor made this recommendation, and it's legible until you get down to number 7. That's some prior to issuance of the building permit, a deed restriction in conformance with shall be completed. Okay, that part's okay. Wait a minute. Maybe there was another one. Oh, like on page 5. Let's see. Replacing condition 46 as recommended by staff is what the modification I'm supposed to be looking for in the resolution. And so then I try to go back to, okay, well, what staff member said something in here? And so I'm not sure what I'm looking for in the resolution. So that's an example of one. I'm not going to be able to sign the resolution because I don't know what was supposed to be recommended. Or so I'd have to go back to the tape, listen to the tape.
Right.
So we're going to have to do a better job of saying the full sentence of as recommended by staff that the blah, 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 blah should be resolved and modified. And I think it's similar to this. Number 4, the addition of condition 50 as recommended by staff. I don't know how I'm supposed to check that. Those are some good examples. Okay, thanks for listening.
But I think as what you said, I think the video of the meeting overlays what's on here and what, so you do have to go back at times and watch the tape, just as I did, you know, when I was chair, or I did when I review the minutes. I've gone back and looked at the tape on that. And then we don't see a copy of the resolution on the minutes the following month to have that either. So it is difficult, but you have to go back to the tape, unfortunately, which I've had to do.
Yeah, if I could interject briefly, the benefit of spelling out what it is you're changing is we know we have a tip-top minutes clerk, and she's more than happy to faithfully transcribe what we're saying. But and I appreciate that the commission can be very efficient. Sometimes that efficiency gets in the way of really understanding what it is. So just to slow down, and if it takes 5 minutes, and especially, you look at some of these motions and there's 10 changes, is just to say it's this, it's that, because your commission is so collaborative, and there's friendly adjustments and conversations and tightening up on the fly, which is wonderful for the final product. But then the question is what is the product? So just And I know Chair Rodriguez is up to the task of clarifying what it is that people are saying. And, you know, staff will do our best to try to ask the question when we are a little bit unclear. But it's just, as pointed out, we don't want to leave it up to a month later or even longer in some cases, what was actually the decision made by the commission.
So is there any other changes that people have to these minutes, Commissioner Swift?
And to your comment on that item, let's see. Item 2, page 5, the item 2 description, change the first sentence from enclosure for an existing 70-unit elderly/disabled housing project to enclosure for an existing 70-unit senior housing project. Nothing was identified in the title of that as disabled, and I don't think Bennett House is disabled from that perspective.
Anything else?
Oh yeah, I got a few, but they're easy. Page 6, correct the spelling of Liesel Blash's name to L-I, and I can just send this to staff, Lisel Blash for the name. Page 7 for my comments, add a 4th bullet to my comments. That's where I stated that this is a health and safety issue. Page 8, Commissioner Newton's comments at the bottom of the page, changed the word nation to national. That was in reference to the FEMA flood insurance program. And then my last one, and I'm not sure how to address this one, but when we were electing the chair and the vice chair, we actually, for the election of the vice chair, we actually had a motion on the table that I was motioning and Chair Rodriguez was seconding that motion. And then we had discussions. Looking at the tape, I know Commissioner Newton said now we have 3 or 4 motions or 3 or 4 seconds and things. Commissioner Fregoso second again, and that was what was captured. So I don't know how we want to address that, but there was actually a motion on the table with my motion with Chair Rodriguez's second. So on that.
Thank you. I also have changes on page 5, bottom of the page. Commissioner Rodriguez asked about the use of natural gas from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint and the use of generators overall. So we're adding the use of. On page 6, Commissioner Rodriguez, 4th bullet, they need to flesh out the solution with respect to solar with battery backup, is adding with battery backup. On page 7, I wanted to ask Commissioner Swift if this is reflected correctly. So I had moved that an acoustical enclosure or be required for the generator, and this says no, you didn't want that to happen. Was that what happened? Did you say you didn't want an acoustical enclosure?
Where are you on that?
Page 7, bottom of the page. It starts with Commissioner Rodriguez recommended an amendment to your motion to add an acoustical enclosure, to reduce the noise. And it says, and Commissioner Swift declined to include this in her motion. Did that happen?
I believe, and I'd have to go back and look at the tape on that, but I believe that one of the second part of what you were requesting, that the generator would only be used for emergency power outages,
Right.
then I know I didn't want that in the motion because we had that discussion that you do weekly testing.
Okay.
And so that kind of thing would limit their use of the generator. So it was probably, so you're right, I probably did decline to
Okay.
include those in the
Good.
motion.
Can I also ask a question? Was the generator actually going to run the elevator, or was it just for the lights and the refrigerators in their rooms?
Elevator.
It was the elevator
It was running the elevator.
as well.
Okay.
That's the
The
problem
other
with
Primarily the elevator.
change I had was on page 11 at the bottom of the page, first bullet. They started down this road with the idea of taking the 1974 open space map and making it a GIS map, is what I tried to say. And that was all the changes I had. Anybody else with any changes?
I don't have any changes, but I would like to echo the desire for the chair to have the red line reso quicker than it has been brought up. It has been put out. And I know it's staff's issue.
Or at least with the minutes, right? The reso with the minutes that
Right,
the chair is reviewing.
yeah, the red line means that. Yeah, the red line reso is with the amendments that were discussed. If it could come out a little quicker, that would be great.
Okay, can I get some clarification? Because I try really hard to get the red line resos to the chair the day after the meeting, but the minutes aren't prepared usually until, a couple weeks later. So
Well, that's the
this
problem.
last year, I got resos to the chairs the days after the meetings, but I didn't get them back up because nobody could sign them and get them back to me.
Right.
Rather have, for me personally, I'd rather have the resolution with a copy of the minutes, even if it's a 2-week time frame.
Yeah.
Because I need to have those two things for me.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then let me just throw this at you. So then we're going to be sending letters of action to applicants that aren't going to include their resolution, which is kind of a problem, and they have to be notified of their 10-day appeal period.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
There are other constraints, you know what I mean? As it is, I send them the resolution before the chair. I do the best I can with getting your comments in, but I get it out to them the next day because I have to advise them of the 10-day appeal.
Well, I guess I better do a better job of keeping track of what the decisions are then, because I'm relying more on that outcome.
The other thing, and I don't know if you can do this, but the other thing I was doing, and I do it now, is I tape the program. So I tape the channel 27.
Wow.
So that I have that to go back to look at, because sometimes, it takes a little bit of time to even get the video on the town's website.
Sometimes you can't get the
Sometimes you can't get the
TV channel either. I've tried.
Well, I'm good with that. Mine have been successful. So that's what I've actually done, is I've just taped it. And then when I get the draft reso, then I can go back and look at that, which is helpful.
Well, Linda, maybe you and I could talk a little bit offline about how to make this work, because I'm sorry, I need a better direction.
I used to wait.
Can we take
I
a
used to
motion
wait
on
for
these
the
minutes then?
resos to do the minutes. Anyway, no,
If I
never
could
mind.
just suggest one thing very quickly, and that is when it comes time to the resolution, to just slow down and speak clearly and make sure that everybody's clear, and that the friendly amendments and all that is if we literally speak slower, it really helps staff, and it helps the minutes clerk. And when we go back to the tape, and just, that's where all of a sudden the conversation gets really slow. And, I appreciate that, we have very bright commissioners, and they can just rattle off 10 amendments, rapid fire, and capture, all 6 other commissioners' comments But it's really good to just say, okay, we're going to change the obscured windows to include this comment. And that way, when somebody does go to the tape, they can cut right to the reso or to the motion and go, okay. And instead of just number 56, it's the this and the that. And that way we, if somebody misses the resolution or the condition number by one, they know that it's really condition number 55. And I'm just saying it's just a little bit of extra time, and spelling things out right there will save a lot of time and effort afterwards.
Okay, so is there any action on these minutes? Can I get somebody to take an action on these minutes?
I think Linda was going to say something.
I want to meet with Linda
I
after.
just wanted my experience with motions and friendly amendments. Once someone makes a motion, nobody should be making like comments. And so I see a couple of you, making comments after the motion's been made. It's one thing if you're adding a friendly amendment, but you shouldn't be, the comment period should all be over. When the commenting happens between the motion, it just gets very confusing for the people that are trying to take notes and keep track of what's happening.
Right. And how we can help once we make a motion, and if people start talking, is to say, there's a motion on the floor.
Yes.
We can't take comments.
That's right. Thank you.
I did that earlier to Commissioner Swift, and
I got to look up my Robert's Rules of Order on that.
Once there's a motion on the floor, you can't entertain any comments until you get a second and you take a vote on the motion, unless it's a friendly amendment.
Any motion?
That's my experience with it too. So
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes as commented.
Thank you. Any
second?
And we have a first and second. Staff, can we call the vote?
yes.
I'll call the go.
Fregoso,
Yes.
Green,
Yes.
Swift,
Yes.
Chair Rodriguez.
Yes. Okay, the motion passes. Good for us. Planning Director's report, please.
I really don't have anything to report tonight, unless commissioners have questions.
Anything that was appealed to the town council from the Planning Commission that we need to know a decision on? Ben?
Yeah, the only item was 6 Walsh Lane, but that was previously reported on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Any commissioner comments and requests? Commissioner Swift.
I wanted to thank Planning Director Berto for putting up on the town's website information on the objective design and development project information. We had talked about that at the last meeting, and he said he'd get it up within a couple of weeks, and it was up there. So that's up there on the same page with the housing element information. And we talked earlier about getting community involvement, and looking at the town's website, there is a place where you can subscribe to get email updates on various topics. It's similar to what, the county does. So there's many topics on there. There is one category that is planning and building updates, including Mirenda Heights. So if town staff can work it so that, because that's an overall planning category, that whenever changes are made and updates to the webpage for either the housing element, so we put up the old housing element, or the things that we put up for the odds effort, that is sent out to the people that are signed up for planning and building updates, including Mirenda Heights, then that would be great.
Given the Commissioner Green's prior comments and the acknowledgement of the high profile nature of what we're doing, staff will get to work on that.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
No particular. I'd like to see everybody in Fairfax wearing a mask. I'd like to see there be signage. The medical advice is even if you've had the vaccine, you still should be wearing a mask because you could be a carrier. They just don't know enough about this yet. I've been wearing a mask since March, and usually I get colds and things in this period. I haven't been sick.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
the
me neither.
mask is my best friend now. The only problem is my phone doesn't recognize me. That's the big problem.
Can I just make one quick comment? Since we're doing Zoom meetings, when we were meeting in the Women's Club, we would leave our packets when we left so that Linda could take the plans out and keep the plans for her needs. And we're not meeting in the Women's Club. So just a idea for the rest of the commissioners. If you have plans in your packets that you pick up, if you have the opportunity, you can drop them back off at Town Hall for Linda, and that might be helpful for her. And then you guys get rid of the plans.
That's a great idea. I was wondering what to do. I've got a box and a half of them right now. One problem I have with picking up packets, though, is twice now I've had to wait almost a half hour outside the planning, outside the building because you can't have two people in there at once. I cannot wait that long. So I don't pick up my packets sometimes. That's because I can't get in. I used to pick it up on a Sunday or something, and I haven't been able to for some reason. But
It's open on weekends. I pick them up.
yeah, that's what I usually was doing. I've been busy weekends now. So.
Yeah.
So I wanted to encourage everybody regarding our planning commission replacement to take a few minutes to think about if there's anybody in your network that you think would be a good addition to start sending them the application. I think that we need to have a good critical person in that position. I'd also like to thank staff for the Split Rock Tap and Wheel. Remember that came through for the outdoor seating area, and we deferred it to staff to work with them on changes, and it actually looks real good. So I'm real glad with that, because I mean, the more we can push to staff like that instead of keep coming back to us, I think is good. And I wanted to ask Ben about that corner downtown, the burrito place. They look like they're doing some improvements. Who's going on in there?
I will ask Principal Planner Neil if she knows what's going on.
It's already gone.
Oh, she's gone. Okay. I don't know, but I'll check.
I think it's, what I heard was that it was going to be, don't know if it's true, a Vietnamese sandwich shop owned by the folks that have the sake
Right.
place.
Okay. Well,
Don't know.
that would be everything from everyone. I would say let's adjourn and have a nice evening.
Yay.
Thank everybody very
Motion to
much for all of
adjourn.
your effort. We're adjourning at 10:35 p.m. and good night to everyone.